The emergency room doors exploded open as Director Marcus Holloway's hand cracked across the nurse's face. The sound echoed through Riverside Memorial Hospital like a gunshot. 30 witnesses froze. Security guards stopped mid-stride. The young woman in pale green scrubs didn't flinch, didn't cry out, just stood there with a red handprint blooming across her cheek while blood dripped from the elderly veteran she'd been treating. But here's what nobody knew. What would become crystal clear when military helicopters descended on the hospital roof 40 minutes later. The quiet nurse they'd just watched get fired and assaulted wasn't just anyone. She was someone the United States Navy had spent years trying to forget existed. Before we dive into what happened next, I need you to do something for me. Stay with this story until the very end, because what unfolds is going to blow your mind. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all started. The storm hit Graymont City 3 hours before everything fell apart. Rain hammered the streets outside Riverside Memorial Hospital, turning the parking lot into a maze of puddles that reflected the emergency room's fluorescent glow. Inside, nurses moved between curtain bays with the mechanical efficiency of people who'd stopped noticing the suffering around them years ago. Phones rang unanswered. Patients groaned in plastic chairs. The clock above the triage desk ticked toward midnight while the storm outside grew worse. Lena Graves stood at the medication cart. Her green scrubs rumpled from a 12-hour shift that should have ended 2 hours ago. She was 31, average height, brown hair pulled back in a ponytail that had started neat at 9 a.m. and now hung loose and messy. Nothing about her stood out. Not her face, not her voice, not the way she moved through the ER like furniture that had always been there. Most people looked right through her. She preferred it that way. "Bed 7 needs vitals," someone called across the bay. Lena grabbed the blood pressure cuff without responding. She'd learned early that talking less meant fewer questions. Questions meant attention. Attention meant people started wondering about the gaps in her resume, the way she went still whenever ambulance sirens got too loud, or why her hands sometimes shook when she wasn't doing anything at all. The automatic doors hissed open and cold air swept through the waiting room. Lena glanced up from the medication cart just as an elderly man stumbled inside, his military surplus jacket dark with rain. He took 3 steps before his legs buckled. His skull cracked against the tile with a sound that made everyone in the waiting room look up from their phones. Blood spread across the white floor in a slow, dark pool. "Someone get a stretcher," the security guard barked, but he didn't move from his post by the door. Lena was already running. She dropped to her knees beside the man, her hands going to his neck to check his pulse while her eyes scanned for injuries. The cut above his left eye was deep, maybe 3 inches long, bleeding fast enough to be worrying. His pupils were uneven. Possible concussion. Possible skull fracture. She pressed her palm against the wound, applying pressure while her other hand reached for his wrist. "Sir, can you hear me? What's your name?" The man's eyes fluttered open. He was maybe 70, weathered skin and gray stubble, the kind of face that had seen things most people only watched in movies. His jacket had a faded patch on the shoulder. Navy insignia, old style, the kind they stopped using 20 years ago. "Monroe," he rasped. "Chief Petty Officer Warren Monroe, retired." "Chief, I need you to stay still for me. You hit your head pretty hard." "I've had worse." His voice was steady despite the blood running down his face. "Who are you?" "Lena. I'm a nurse. Just hold on." She could feel people watching, but nobody was helping. The other nurses stood frozen by the triage desk. The security guard was on his radio calling for backup that would take 10 minutes to arrive. Patients in the waiting room held up their phones, recording instead of doing anything useful. "Does he have insurance?" someone called out. Lena ignored them. She grabbed gauze from her pocket. She always kept supplies on her because the ER never had enough where you needed it, and packed it against Monroe's wound. The bleeding was slowing but not stopping. He needed stitches. He needed them now. "Someone bring me a suture kit," Lena said, not looking up. "We can't treat him until registration processes. He's bleeding out on your floor. Get me the kit." Footsteps approached from behind. Lena recognized them before she turned around. Heavy, deliberate. The kind of walk that announced authority before the person even spoke. "What's going on here?" Marcus Holloway stood over her like a wall. 6'3", broad shoulders, expensive suit that probably cost more than Lena made in a month. He was 45 and looked like someone who'd spent his whole life being told yes. Director of Operations at Riverside Memorial, Harvard Medical School on his wall, 3 luxury cars in the parking garage, and an ego that filled every room he walked into. "I'm treating a patient," Lena said. "I can see that. Who authorized emergency treatment without registration?" "He's injured." "That's not what I asked." Lena kept pressure on Monroe's wound, watching Holloway from the corner of her eye. She'd worked under him for 2 years and learned early that the man cared more about policy than people. Budget reports mattered more than patient outcomes. Hospital reputation mattered more than the truth. "Nobody authorized it," Lena said. "I made the call." "Then you made it wrong." Holloway's voice carried across the waiting room, making sure everyone heard. "This hospital has procedures. Registration first, treatment second. You know that." "He was bleeding. He's also uninsured. I can see that from here." Holloway gestured at Monroe's worn jacket, his scuffed boots. "This isn't a charity clinic, Graves. We have standards." Monroe tried to sit up. "I can pay—" "Stay down, Chief," Lena said quietly. Holloway's jaw tightened. "Step away from the patient. Not until he's stable. I'm ordering you to step back." Lena looked up at him for the first time. Holloway stared down at her with the kind of cold fury that came from someone who wasn't used to being contradicted. The waiting room had gone completely silent. Even the phones had stopped ringing. "I need a suture kit," Lena said. "His wound needs to be closed or he's going to keep bleeding." "Then let the attending physician make that determination." "The attending is in surgery. It'll be an hour before anyone else is available." "Then he waits." Lena held Holloway's stare for 3 long seconds. Then she turned back to Monroe and pulled the gauze away from his wound to assess the damage. The bleeding had slowed enough. She could work with that. "Someone get me a suture kit," she said again. "Now." A young nurse near the supply room hesitated, then started moving toward the cabinet. Holloway's voice cracked like a whip. "Touch that cabinet and you're fired." The nurse froze. Lena stood slowly, blood on her hands and scrubs, facing Holloway across Monroe's body. The director stepped closer, invading her space, using his height to intimidate. "It might have worked on someone else." "You're creating a liability issue," Holloway said, quiet now, meant only for her. "If something goes wrong with this patient, the hospital gets sued, you get sued, your license gets reviewed, all because you couldn't follow basic protocol. If something goes wrong, it'll be because you stopped me from helping him. I'm protecting this hospital. You're protecting your budget." Holloway's face went red. "My office. Now." "I'm in the middle of now." Lena glanced down at Monroe. The old veteran was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not grateful, not scared. Something else. Recognition, maybe? Like he'd seen this exact situation play out before in a different life. "I'll be right back, Chief," Lena said. "I'll be here," Monroe replied. She followed Holloway across the ER, past the nurses' station where everyone suddenly found something urgent to look at on their computer screens, through the double doors marked staff only, and into Holloway's office with its mahogany desk and diplomas covering the walls like armor. Holloway shut the door and turned on her. 2 years you've worked here. 2 years of walking around like you're better than everyone else. Too good to socialize, too good to play politics, too good to follow the rules that keep this place running. I follow the rules that matter. You don't get to decide which rules matter. I do. Holloway moved behind his desk, putting furniture between them like a barrier. You want to know what I see when I look at you, Graves? I see someone who thinks they're special. Someone who thinks the rules don't apply to them because they've got some kind of moral high ground. Lena said nothing. You know what's actually happening out there? Holloway continued. That man is a vagrant, probably drunk, probably fell because he couldn't walk straight. And you're wasting hospital resources on someone who isn't going to pay his bill. He's a veteran. He's uninsured. He served his country. That's very touching. Holloway's voice dripped with sarcasm. But this hospital runs on money, not patriotism. We treat paying patients. We stabilize emergencies and transfer non-paying patients to county facilities. That's the system. That's reality. Reality is a man bleeding on your floor while you worry about optics. Holloway slammed his hand on the desk. You're fired. The words hung in the air between them. Lena felt something shift in her chest, a strange mix of relief and resignation. She'd known this was coming eventually, known it the moment she'd ignored policy to help Monroe. Some part of her had been waiting for this since the day she'd taken the job. Effective immediately, Holloway continued. Clean out your locker and leave your badge with security. And consider yourself lucky I'm not reporting you to the licensing board. You're firing me for helping someone. I'm firing you for gross insubordination and violation of hospital policy. Holloway sat down, already dismissing her. Security will escort you out. Don't make a scene. Lena turned toward the door, then stopped. What about Monroe? He'll be processed through the appropriate channels. He needs stitches. That's no longer your concern. Lena walked back into the ER where everything looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes ago. Nurses at their stations, patients in their bays. Monroe still on the floor with gauze pressed against his head, now surrounded by 2 security guards who looked uncomfortable being there. She knelt beside him one more time. They're kicking me out, Chief, but someone will take care of you. Monroe looked at her with those steady eyes. What's your last name, nurse? Graves. Lena Graves. You former military, Graves? The question hit her like cold water. Lena's hands went still on the gauze. Why do you ask? The way you work. Fast, efficient, no wasted movement. Monroe smiled slightly. I've seen field medics with worse technique. I'm just a nurse. Sure you are. Security arrived then, 2 guards who'd probably known Lena for 2 years and now couldn't look her in the eye. She stood up slowly, removed her hospital badge from the lanyard around her neck, and handed it to the closest guard. Let's go, Lena, the guard said quietly. They walked her past the nurse's station where her co-workers suddenly found their computer screens fascinating, past the supply closets where she'd spent 2 years restocking and organizing, past the break room where she'd eaten lunch alone every day because small talk felt like lying. They were halfway to the exit when Holloway appeared in the hallway ahead of them. One more thing, Graves. Lena stopped. Holloway walked toward her with that same predatory confidence, and for a moment she thought he was going to say something about her final paycheck or hospital property. Instead, he got close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. You cost this hospital money today, Holloway said. That makes you a problem, and I deal with problems. Then he hit her. The slap echoed through the hallway like thunder. Lena's head snapped to the side, her cheek exploding with heat. She tasted copper, felt her teeth cut the inside of her mouth. The security guard stepped back, shocked, not sure what to do. Lena stood perfectly still, her face burning, blood warm on her tongue. She didn't raise her hand to her cheek, didn't cry out, didn't even blink. She just stood there, looking at something past Holloway's shoulder, her mind somewhere else entirely. Somewhere with sand and gunfire and people screaming in 3 different languages. Somewhere she'd learned that pain was temporary, but staying alive required absolute stillness. Get her out of my hospital, Holloway said. The guards hesitated, then gently guided Lena toward the exit. She walked between them like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the tile. Behind her, she could hear Holloway's dress shoes clicking as he walked back toward his office, already moving on to the next problem. They pushed through the emergency exit into the storm. Rain hit Lena's face like 1,000 cold needles, washing away the blood in her mouth. The parking lot stretched out before her, dark and empty except for a few cars belonging to the overnight shift. Lena, I'm sorry, one of the guards said. That shouldn't have... It's fine. It's not fine. He hit you. We saw it. Are you going to report it? The guard looked away. I've got 3 kids. I can't lose this job. I know. They left her standing there in the rain, and Lena didn't move for a long time. She just stood under the harsh glow of the parking lot lights, feeling the water soak through her scrubs, her mind completely blank. Somewhere behind her, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside the hospital, Chief Petty Officer Warren Monroe sat on the floor of the ER, holding gauze to his head, watching through the glass doors as the nurse who'd treated him disappeared into the storm. One of the young nurses finally approached him with a suture kit. Let me take care of that for you, sir. Monroe waved her away and reached into his jacket pocket with his free hand. His fingers found his phone, old and battered, held together with electrical tape. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the one he needed. The call connected on the second ring. It's Monroe, he said. I need you to pull a file for me. Civilian nurse named Lena Graves. working at Riverside Memorial in Graymont. And do it quiet. He listened for a moment, then smiled. Yeah, I think she's one of ours. Just need to confirm. Monroe ended the call and looked around the ER where nurses and doctors were carefully avoiding his eyes. Nobody wanted to help him now that the woman who'd cared was gone. That was fine. He'd been ignored before. He pressed the gauze harder against his wound and settled in to wait. 20 minutes later, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. Monroe opened it and stared at the screen for a long time, reading the file that appeared there. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went very still. After another minute, he made a second call. It's Monroe again, he said. I need immediate medical transport to Riverside Memorial Hospital in Graymont City. Full security detail, and get Commander Reed on a secure line. Tell him I found someone he's been looking for. He hung up and looked back toward the doors where Lena Graves had walked into the storm. Well, I'll be damned, Monroe said quietly. Outside, the rain fell harder. Thunder shook the windows, and somewhere above the clouds, rotors began to spin. Lena had walked 3 blocks from the hospital before she stopped moving. She stood under a broken streetlight at the corner of Madison and 5th, water running down her face, her scrubs clinging to her skin. The city looked different at night, emptier, more honest. No pretending things were better than they were. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. Probably HR asking her to sign paperwork confirming her termination. Probably telling her to return her scrubs because they were hospital property. Probably reminding her that she'd signed an NDA and couldn't talk about anything she'd seen. She kept walking. No destination in mind. Just moving because standing still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering things she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. The street curved past a 24-hour diner with flickering neon in the window. A homeless woman slept in the doorway of a closed laundromat. 2 kids on skateboards rolled past, their wheels hissing on wet pavement. Normal city sounds, normal city life. Lena's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She shoved them in her pockets and kept walking until she found herself at Graymont Park, standing at the edge of the empty soccer field where the rain had turned the grass to mud. Nobody was out here. Nobody was stupid enough to be walking in this weather. She sat down on a bench, not caring that it was soaked, and finally let herself feel the ache in her face where Holloway had hit her. The skin was already swelling. She'd have a bruise by morning. People would see it and make assumptions. Domestic violence, probably. Abusive boyfriend. Nobody would guess the truth. Her phone buzzed again. This time she pulled it out and looked at the screen. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her thumb slide across the glass. Hello? Static crackled on the line, then a voice came through. Male. Authoritative. The kind of voice that expected to be obeyed. Is this Lena Graves? Who's asking? Commander Elias Reed, United States Navy. I need you to return to Riverside Memorial Hospital immediately. Lena stood up slowly, her heart suddenly pounding. How did you get this number? That's not important right now. What's important is that I don't work there anymore. I'm aware. I need you to come back anyway. Why? Reed paused. Because Chief Monroe asked for you specifically, and because there are some questions about your service record that need to be cleared up. The world tilted slightly. Lena gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles going white. I don't know what you're talking about. Lena Graves, formerly Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Graves, formerly attached to Naval Special Warfare Command, formerly deployed to Stop. I need you to come back to the hospital. No. That wasn't a request. Then court-martial me. Lena's voice came out harder than she intended. I'm not active duty anymore. You can't order me to do anything. Reed's voice softened slightly. Chief Monroe is asking, not ordering. He says you saved his life tonight, and he wants to thank you properly. I just did my job. That's exactly what he said you'd say. Reed paused. Please come back, Corpsman. Just for a few minutes. Then you can disappear again if that's what you want. Lena stood there in the rain, phone pressed to her ear, every instinct screaming at her to hang up and run. She'd left that life behind. She'd buried Hospital Corpsman Graves under 2 years of civilian nursing and careful anonymity. She'd built a quiet life where nobody asked questions and nobody cared who she'd been before. Now someone was digging it all back up. I'll think about it, she said, and ended the call. But even as she said it, she was already walking back toward the hospital. Not because she wanted to, because Monroe had recognized something in her that she thought she'd hidden. Because a Navy commander knew her name and her rank, and probably knew a lot more than that. Because sometimes the past didn't let you stay buried. The walk back took 15 minutes. By the time Lena reached the hospital parking lot, she could hear something that made her stop dead in her tracks. Helicopter rotors. She looked up through the rain and saw lights descending from the clouds. Not civilian birds. Military, fast attack Seahawks, 2 of them, dropping toward the hospital roof with the kind of precision that came from combat pilots. Lena's breath caught in her chest. They weren't here for Monroe. They were here for her. The helicopters touched down on Riverside Memorial's rooftop with a precision that sent water spraying in all directions. Lena stood frozen in the parking lot, rain soaking through her already drenched scrubs, watching figures emerge from the aircraft in tactical gear. Not medical transport. Combat deployment. The kind of response reserved for hostage situations or terrorist threats. Not for a retired nurse who just wanted to be left alone. She turned to walk away, but headlights caught her from behind, and a black SUV pulled up alongside the curb. The rear door opened and Commander Reed stepped out, his Navy dress uniform somehow still crisp despite the weather. He was maybe 45, salt and pepper hair cut military short, the kind of bearing that came from decades of making life or death decisions. Corpsman Graves. Lena kept walking. I can have my men physically escort you inside if necessary. Try it. Reed moved to block her path, and Lena stopped, her jaw tight. They stood there on the rain-slicked sidewalk, sizing each other up like opponents before a match. Reed's eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Not the bruise forming on her cheek, not the way she held herself with perfect stillness, not the fact that her hands had moved fractionally toward defensive positions before she'd forced them to relax. You don't want this attention, Reed said. I understand that. You left the service for a reason, and you've been keeping your head down ever since. But Chief Monroe recognized you tonight, and now the situation is out of your control. There's no situation. Marcus Holloway struck a decorated combat medic in front of 30 witnesses. That's a situation. I'm not decorated, I'm just... Hospital Corpsman Second Class Lena Graves, 2 combat deployments, attached to SEAL Team 7 during Operation Sandstorm. Kept 4 critically wounded operators alive for 6 hours during an ambush in Kandahar province while under continuous enemy fire. Reed's voice was quiet, but every word landed like a hammer. Navy Cross recommended. Purple Heart awarded. Medical discharge after suffering traumatic injuries. That's who Marcus Holloway hit tonight. Lena's hands were shaking again. That was a long time ago. 3 years. I'm not that person anymore. Chief Monroe seems to think otherwise. Reed gestured toward the hospital entrance where more military personnel were arriving, sailors in working uniforms escorting someone on a stretcher. No, not someone. Monroe. They were treating him like a VIP, which meant Reed had pulled serious strings to get this response mobilized so fast. He asked for you specifically, Reed continued, said you worked on him like you'd done it 1,000 times before. Field conditions, no hesitation, textbook trauma protocol. Most civilian nurses panic when they see that much blood. Most civilian nurses haven't seen worse. Exactly. Reed stepped closer. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to come inside, let the medical team check that bruise on your face, and answer a few questions about what happened tonight. Then we'll discuss what comes next. Nothing comes next. I'm going home. Your home is underwater, Corpsman. Burst pipe flooded your apartment building 2 hours ago. Building manager called it in around the same time you were getting fired. You've got nowhere to go. Lena stared at him. You're lying. Reed pulled out his phone and showed her a news alert. Sure enough, her apartment complex was in the photo, water pouring from a second-floor window. Emergency vehicles surrounding the building. Residents standing in the street with whatever belongings they'd managed to grab. Sometimes the universe decides for you, Reed said. Lena wanted to argue, but she was cold and wet, and suddenly so tired she could barely stand. The adrenaline from earlier was fading, leaving behind exhaustion that went bone deep. She'd been running for 3 years, moving from city to city, taking jobs that paid cash and didn't ask too many questions. She'd thought Graymont would be different, thought she could finally stop. Just a few questions, Reed said. Then I'll personally drive you wherever you want to go. Lena looked up at the hospital, at the military presence that had descended on it like an occupying force. Every instinct told her to run. but Reed was right about one thing. She had nowhere left to go. Fine. They walked through the emergency entrance together, and Lena felt every pair of eyes in the waiting room lock onto her. The nurses at the station who'd watched her get fired, the security guards who'd escorted her out, the patients who'd recorded the whole thing on their phones. They all stared as she walked past with the Navy commander at her side. Holloway emerged from his office, stopping dead when he saw her. "What the hell is this? I told security to—" "Director Holloway." Reed's voice cut through the ER like a blade. "I'm Commander Elias Reed, Naval Medical Command. I need to speak with you about an incident that occurred here tonight." Holloway's face went through several expressions before settling on indignant. "Whatever she told you is a lie. That woman violated hospital policy and became violent when confronted. She became violent. Yes, the same woman who's 5'6" and weighs maybe 120 pounds attacked you. A 6'3" man with 50 pounds on her. She was insubordinate and— Did you strike this woman, Director?" The ER went completely silent. Even the monitors seemed to stop beeping. Holloway's jaw worked, but no sound came out for several long seconds. "That's a personnel matter between—" "It's a criminal matter now. 37 witnesses, including 2 security guards, saw you assault a former military servicewoman. I've already contacted the district attorney's office." Reed pulled out a tablet and scrolled through something. "I've also been reviewing your hospital's treatment protocols. Fascinating reading, particularly the section about denying emergency care to veterans based on insurance status. We don't deny care, we simply— You had a veteran bleeding on your floor for 20 minutes while your staff argued about paperwork. Hospital policy requires registration before— Federal law requires immediate medical screening and stabilization regardless of ability to pay. Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act passed in 1986. I'm surprised a Harvard-educated hospital director isn't familiar with it." Holloway's face had gone from red to pale. "I want my lawyer." "Excellent idea." Reed gestured to 2 shore patrol officers who'd appeared near the doors. "These gentlemen will escort you to a private room where you can make that call. In the meantime, the hospital board has been notified and is convening an emergency meeting." "You can't do this." "I just did." The shore patrol moved in and Holloway suddenly looked smaller, less imposing, like someone had let the air out of him. He shot Lena a look of pure venom as they led him away, and she watched him go with absolutely no expression on her face. Reed turned to the gathered staff. "I need to speak with everyone who witnessed the assault on Corpsman Graves. One at a time, in private. Starting with security." The guards who'd escorted Lena out earlier exchanged nervous glances. One of them stepped forward, a younger guy named Patterson, who'd always been decent to her. "Sir, we saw Director Holloway strike her. It was unprovoked." "Did anyone attempt to intervene?" Patterson looked at the floor. "No, sir." "Why not?" "He's our boss. We'd lose our jobs." Reed nodded slowly. "Understood. Write down everything you saw and sign it. Same goes for the rest of you." He looked at the nurses who were suddenly very busy pretending to work. "Every witness statement will be turned over to local authorities and the hospital board. This isn't optional." Monroe appeared in the hallway then, freshly bandaged, walking under his own power despite the medics trying to get him to sit in a wheelchair. He spotted Lena, and his weathered face broke into something that almost resembled a smile. "There she is. Told you she'd come back." "I didn't have much choice," Lena said quietly. "Still counts." Monroe looked at Reed. "You pull her file?" "I did." "And?" "Everything you suspected." Monroe studied Lena with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You did good work tonight, Corpsman. Fast, clean, no panic. Reminded me of someone I served with years back. Another medic who worked like she'd been doing it in combat zones her whole life." Lena's chest felt tight. "I don't know what you think you know about me. I know you saved my life. I know you lost your job for it. And I know you've been running from something for a long time." Monroe stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I also know that the ambush in Kandahar wasn't your fault." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. She took a step back, her breathing suddenly too fast, the ER lights too bright. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear rotors again, or maybe that was just her memory, playing tricks the way it always did when someone mentioned Kandahar. "I need some air." She pushed through the doors into a side corridor before anyone could stop her, walking fast, her vision tunneling. She found a supply closet and ducked inside, closing the door behind her. The darkness felt safer, quieter. She pressed her back against the shelves and tried to slow her breathing. Kandahar. They were talking about Kandahar. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 3 years. Hadn't let herself think about it. Hadn't let herself remember the heat and the dust and the screaming that went on for hours. She'd buried it under layers of civilian life and quiet shifts and the careful anonymity of being nobody special. The door opened and Reed stood silhouetted in the fluorescent light. Get out. Can't do that, Corpsman? I'm not a corpsman anymore. Your discharge was medical, not dishonorable. You're still one of ours. Reed stepped into the closet and closed the door behind him, plunging them back into darkness. And one of ours just got publicly assaulted by a civilian administrator who thinks veterans are disposable. This isn't about veterans. It's about exactly that. Reed's voice was harder now. You think Holloway would have hit you if you were just some random nurse? He hit you because he thought you were nobody. No family, no connections, no way to fight back. People like him prey on people like you because they think nobody's watching. Nobody was watching. Monroe was, and now I am. Reed pulled out his phone and the screen glow illuminated his face. I've been reviewing your service jacket. After you were wounded, you spent 4 months at Walter Reed. Physical therapy, psychological evaluation, the whole protocol. Then you signed your discharge papers and disappeared. Didn't apply for VA benefits. Didn't use your GI Bill. Didn't contact anyone from your old unit. I wanted out. You wanted to hide. Same thing. Reed was quiet for a moment. The after-action report from Kandahar said you operated on 4 critically wounded operators while taking enemy fire. Used supplies from a shot-up aid station, no backup, no evacuation available. You performed 2 emergency thoracotomies in the field and kept 3 guys breathing manually for over an hour. Youngest medic in theater, only survivor from your position. Lena closed her eyes. I know what the report says. Then you know it also says the ambush wasn't your fault. Intelligence failure, bad coordinates, wrong place, wrong time. Doesn't change what happened. No, but it means you're not responsible for the 4 operators who didn't make it. I didn't save them. That's the same as killing them. That's survivor's guilt talking. That's reality talking. Lena's voice cracked. I had everything I needed to keep those men alive, and it wasn't enough. So I came home and I tried to do something that mattered with whatever I had left. And tonight I got fired and assaulted for trying to help one old veteran who probably would have been fine waiting for the attending. He wouldn't have been fine. You saw the scan results? Lena looked up. What scan? Subdural hematoma. Slow bleed inside his skull. If you hadn't stopped him from getting up and walking out, he would have collapsed somewhere between here and wherever he was going. Probably would have died alone on a street corner. Reed pulled up an image on his phone. The attending found it 20 minutes ago. Monroe's in surgery now, getting it drained. The air left Lena's lungs. You saved his life, Reed continued. Not might have. Did. And Holloway fired you for it. They stood there in the dark supply closet, surrounded by boxes of gauze and syringes, while Lena processed what Reed had just told her. She'd saved Monroe. Not just helped him, not just bought him time, actually saved him from dying alone in the rain. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to understand what's about to happen. Reed pocketed his phone. Holloway assaulted a military veteran in front of multiple witnesses. The hospital board is already moving to suspend him pending investigation. Local news is probably getting wind of this as we speak. By tomorrow morning, you're going to be the story. Fired nurse, combat veteran, struck by hospital director. Media will make you a hero whether you want it or not. I don't want it. I know. But here's your choice. You can run again, disappear into another city with another fake resume and another job that asks no questions. Or you can stay and let this mean something. Let Holloway face consequences. Let the hospital answer for putting policy over patients. Let other veterans see that someone fought for them. Lena shook her head. I'm not a hero. I'm just tired. That's not mutually exclusive. The door opened again and Patterson stuck his head in. Commander, you need to see this. They followed him back to the ER, where every television was tuned to the local news. Lena's face filled the screens. A photo someone had taken on their phone, her kneeling beside Monroe with blood on her hands, the moment right before Holloway had arrived. The caption read, Veteran nurse fired for saving veteran's life. How did they... Who? Someone in the waiting room posted it to social media an hour ago. Patterson pulled up his phone and showed her. It's already got 50,000 shares. People are pissed. The news anchor was interviewing someone via phone, and Lena's stomach dropped when she recognized the voice. Patterson, the security guard, telling the world what he'd witnessed. Director Holloway struck her across the face with enough force that we heard it from across the room. She didn't fight back, didn't even defend herself, just stood there while he fired her for helping a man who was bleeding on the floor. The anchor's voice was sharp with outrage. And this nurse is a military veteran? According to Commander Reed from the Navy, yes ma'am, combat medic served in Afghanistan. Has the hospital made a statement? Not yet, but there are military personnel all over the place now. I think this is bigger than just one nurse getting fired. Reed turned off the nearest television. Welcome to going viral, Corman. Lena couldn't breathe. This was the nightmare scenario. Her face on the news, her name in headlines, her past dragged into public view for everyone to dissect and analyze. She'd spent 3 years staying invisible, and now she was the most visible person in Greymont City. I need to leave. Now. And go where? Your apartment's flooded, you just lost your job, and every news station in the state is trying to find you. Reed's voice softened. I have a better idea. The Navy owns a property about 20 minutes from here. Secure, private. You can stay there until this dies down. How long will that take? Honestly? Might be a while, but at least you'll be safe. Safe. Lena almost laughed. She hadn't felt safe since the day she'd watched 4 good men die because she hadn't been good enough to save them. She'd carried that weight across 2 continents and a dozen cities, and now everyone was calling her a hero for doing the bare minimum of human decency. What about Monroe? He'll be in recovery for a few days, then he'll be transferred to Naval Medical Center for follow-up care. He's already asking about you. What does he want? Reed hesitated. To say thank you, and to tell you something about Kandahar. Lena's blood went cold. What about Kandahar? He says he knew your commanding officer, says there's something you should know about the ambush. I know everything I need to know. Bad intel, bad luck, 4 dead operators. Monroe says it wasn't bad luck. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Lena stared at Reed, trying to process what he was suggesting. That Kandahar wasn't random, that the ambush that had killed 4 men and destroyed her career wasn't just tragedy, but something else. Something worse. What are you saying? I'm saying you should talk to Monroe when he wakes up. And I'm saying you should let me take you somewhere safe so you can think about whether you want to keep running or stand and fight. Before Lena could respond, the ER doors burst open and a woman in an expensive suit marched in, flanked by 2 lawyers. She was maybe 50, perfectly styled hair despite the late hour. The kind of presence that said she was used to being in charge of rooms full of people who didn't want to listen. I'm Laura Vance, hospital board president. I need to speak with Director Holloway immediately. Reed stepped forward. He's in a secure room awaiting legal counsel regarding assault charges. Vance's eyes narrowed. Assault charges? He struck a former employee in front of multiple witnesses. We have statements. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. Your director of operations hit a decorated combat veteran hard enough to leave a bruise. The Shore Patrol has already filed a report with local police. Vance looked like she'd been slapped herself. Her lawyers immediately started whispering in her ears, but she waved them silent, her gaze sweeping the ER until it landed on Lena. You're the nurse. Former nurse, Lena corrected, the one who treated the veteran against hospital policy. I treated a man who was bleeding, that's all. Vance studied her for a long moment, then turned to her lawyers. Get Holloway's personnel file. Every complaint, every incident report, every performance review. I want it on my desk in an hour. She looked back at Lena. And I want a full account of what happened tonight. Not the version Holloway told me, the real version. Your director hit her, Reed said flatly. That's the real version. I need to hear it from her. Lena met Vance's eyes and saw something unexpected there. Not sympathy exactly, but a willingness to actually listen. Maybe even to believe. He fired me for helping a patient, Lena said quietly. I followed him to his office. He said I was fired. I walked out. He stopped me in the hallway and hit me in front of security. Then they escorted me off hospital property. That's what happened. Did you threaten him? No. Did you raise your voice, make aggressive movements, anything that could be construed as threatening? I stood there and took it, just like I was trained. Something flickered in Vance's expression. Trained? Hospital Corpsman Second Class Lena Graves, Reed supplied. 2 combat deployments. Medical discharge with honors. She's been working here for 2 years as a civilian nurse. Vance's face went pale. You're military. Was military. And Holloway knew this? I never told him. But it would be in your employment file. Vance turned to one of her lawyers. Pull Graves' file too. I want to know exactly what Holloway knew and when he knew it. She looked back at Lena. I'm sorry this happened. The board will be conducting a full investigation. Investigations take time, Reed said. Your director assaulted a veteran. What's the board doing right now? Suspending him pending the investigation? Not good enough. It's the process. Your process got a veteran treated like garbage and an employee assaulted. Your process is broken. Reed's voice was cold. I've already contacted the Department of Veterans Affairs and the media. By morning, every news outlet in the country is going to know that Riverside Memorial fired a combat medic for saving a veteran's life. You want to talk about process while your hospital becomes a national embarrassment? Vance's lawyers were frantically whispering again, but she silenced them with a look. What do you want, Commander? Holloway terminated immediately. Full investigation into hospital protocols regarding veteran care, and a formal apology to Corpsman Graves in writing from the board. We don't negotiate. You do now. Because if this goes public the way it's heading, your hospital will be the cautionary tale every healthcare administrator points to when discussing how not to treat veterans. Reed pulled out his tablet. I've already got calls from CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC asking about the nurse who got fired for being a hero. You want to do this the hard way or the smart way? Vance looked between Reed and Lena, clearly doing calculations in her head. Political fallout, financial impact, reputation damage, all the things that mattered to people who ran hospitals like businesses instead of places where humans helped other humans. The board meets in 3 hours, Vance finally said. I'll recommend immediate termination of Director Holloway and a complete review of our emergency care protocols, but I need her to stay in the city until this is resolved. She'll stay, Reed said before Lena could object. Vance nodded and swept out of the ER with her lawyers trailing behind like satellites. The moment she was gone, Reed turned to Lena. You okay? No? Fair enough. Let's get you somewhere quiet. They walked through the hospital corridors toward the parking garage, passing nurses and doctors who stared at Lena like she was a bomb that might go off. She kept her eyes forward, trying to ignore the whispers that followed them. Reed's SUV was waiting in a reserved spot. He opened the passenger door and Lena climbed in, her body finally starting to register how exhausted she was. The clock on the dashboard read 2:47 a.m. She'd been fired, hit, and turned into a news story in less than 4 hours. They drove through empty streets toward the north side of Graymont, past closed shops and sleeping houses. Lena watched the city roll by through rain-streaked windows, wondering if she'd ever be able to walk these streets again without everyone recognizing her face. Where are we going? Safe house the Navy maintains for personnel needing temporary housing. It's quiet, secure. Nobody will bother you there. How long do I have to stay? Long as you need. Reed glanced at her, but I'd recommend at least until we figure out what Monroe wants to tell you about Kandahar. There it was again. That name. That place. That day when everything had gone wrong and she'd been powerless to stop it. I don't want to talk about Kandahar. You might change your mind when you hear what Monroe has to say. There's nothing he can say that'll change what happened. Reed pulled into a quiet residential street lined with trees. He parked in front of a modest 2-story house with lights on inside. Someone's already here prepping the place. Fresh clothes, food, everything you need. Lena looked at the house, at the warm glow coming from the windows, and felt something crack inside her chest. She'd been so cold for so long, running from city to city, never staying long enough for anyone to care whether she lived or died. And now here was a Navy commander offering her shelter and safety and answers to questions she'd been too afraid to ask. Why are you doing this? Reed turned off the engine. Because 3 years ago, you saved 4 of my operators when everyone else said it was impossible. 2 of them are back on active duty. One's teaching at the academy. One's retired with his family in Virginia. They're alive because you wouldn't give up on them. Lena's throat closed. I lost 4 men. You saved 4 more. That's the difference. Reed opened his door. Come on, let's get you inside before the media finds this location. They walked up the front path together, and Reed knocked twice before opening the door. Inside, the house was exactly what he'd promised. Clean, warm, anonymous. A young sailor in working uniform nodded to Reed and handed him a folder. Everything's ready, sir. Clothes in the bedroom upstairs, food in the kitchen. Secure phone on the counter if she needs to make calls. Thanks, Rodriguez. You can head out. Rodriguez glanced at Lena with something like awe before leaving through the back door. Reed closed and locked the front door behind him, then handed Lena the folder. Information about Holloway's suspension and the board investigation. Your rights as a terminated employee. Contact numbers if you need anything. And a message from Chief Monroe. Lena opened the folder and found a handwritten note on hospital stationery. Corman Graves. Thank you for saving my life tonight. I know you don't want to be found, but there are things you need to know about Operation Sandstorm, things that were kept from you. We served with some of the same people. We lost some of the same people. And what happened in Kandahar wasn't what you were told it was. When I'm out of surgery, I'd like to talk. No pressure. But I think you deserve the truth. Chief Warren Monroe. Lena read the note 3 times, her hands shaking, Monroe's words burning into her brain. What happened in Kandahar wasn't what you were told it was. What did that mean? How could the worst day of her life be anything other than what she remembered? He's serious, Reed said quietly. Monroe doesn't make statements like that unless he's got evidence. Evidence of what? That's what you need to ask him. Lena looked up at Reed, this commander who'd dropped everything to help a medic he'd never met, who'd brought military force down on a civilian hospital because someone had struck one of his people. She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that there were still people in the world who fought for what was right instead of what was convenient. But trust was a currency she'd lost in the desert 3 years ago. I'll think about it, she said. Reed nodded. That's all I'm asking. Get some rest. I'll be back in the morning with an update on Monroe's surgery. He started toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. The operators you saved, they asked me to tell you something. What? That they never blamed you for the ones who didn't make it. They said you fought like hell for all of them, and the fact that 4 survived is a miracle you created with nothing but skill and refusal to quit. The words hit Lena harder than Holloway's slap. She stood there in the safe house living room, clutching Monroe's note, while 3 years of guilt and pain and running crashed over her like a wave. They don't know what they're talking about. They were there, Corman. You weren't. Reed left through this front door, and Lena heard his SUV start up and drive away into the night. She stood alone in the silent house, surrounded by furniture that belonged to someone else, wearing scrubs that still smelled like hospital disinfectant and rain. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her look at the message. This is Patterson from Riverside Security. I'm sorry I didn't stop him from hitting you. I was scared of losing my job, but I gave a full statement to the police, and I'll testify if you need me to. What he did was wrong. Then another message from one of the ER nurses. You were right to help that veteran. We should have backed you up. I'm sorry. Then another, and another. A dozen messages from coworkers she'd barely spoken to in 2 years, all saying variations of the same thing. We're sorry. We should have done something. You didn't deserve what happened. Lena sat down on the couch and let the phone drop from her hands. She thought about Monroe in surgery, Reed driving through the rain, Holloway suspended and facing charges, the whole city watching a story unfold that she'd never wanted to be part of. She thought about Kandahar and the 4 men she'd saved and the 4 she'd lost, and the question Monroe had raised, what if you weren't told the truth? Outside, lightning flashed across the sky, and Lena Graves, hospital corpsman 2nd class, veteran of 2 wars, survivor of an ambush that should have killed her, closed her eyes and let herself cry for the first time in 3 years. Across the city, in a recovery room at Riverside Memorial Hospital, Chief Warren Monroe opened his eyes from anesthesia and asked the nurse standing over him a single question. Did she read my note? The nurse checked Monroe's vitals and made a non-committal sound. Commander Reed said you'd ask about her first thing. She's at a secure location, safe. That's not what I asked. She has your note. Monroe closed his eyes again, not from pain, but from something that looked like relief. The nurse adjusted his IV drip and left him alone in the recovery room where machines beeped their steady rhythms and the smell of antiseptic hung thick in the air. He reached for the phone on the bedside table with his good hand. The other was strapped down with monitoring equipment, and dialed a number he'd memorized 40 years ago when he first joined the Navy. The kind of number you only used when regular channels weren't enough. Monroe, I need to talk to Captain Reeves. I don't care what time it is in Virginia, wake him up. 600 miles away, Lena woke on the safe house couch at dawn, with her neck stiff and her face aching where Holloway had hit her. Sunlight streamed through the windows she didn't recognize, and for a few confused seconds she couldn't remember where she was or why every muscle in her body hurt. Then it came back. The hospital, the slap, the helicopters, Monroe's note about Kandahar. What happened wasn't what you were told. She stood and walked to the kitchen where someone had stocked the refrigerator with actual food, not just the cheap frozen meals she usually lived on. Fresh fruit, real coffee, bread that wasn't mostly air. The kind of provision someone put together when they were planning for more than just a night or two. Her phone sat on the counter where she'd left it, the screen dark but somehow menacing. She knew what would happen if she turned it on. Messages from reporters, requests for interviews. Probably her face plastered across every news site in the country by now. The viral video of her kneeling beside Monroe would have millions of views. She made coffee instead of checking. Strong enough to strip paint, the way she'd learned to drink it overseas when sleep was a luxury and alertness was survival. The secure phone Reed had mentioned sat next to hers, a simple black device with no markings. She picked it up and found a single contact programmed in, Commander Reed. No other numbers. No internet access. Just a direct line to the man who'd turned her life inside out in the span of 4 hours. She almost called him, almost demanded answers about what Monroe knew, what secrets were buried in Kandahar, why everyone seemed to think she deserved to know things that had been classified above her pay grade 3 years ago. Instead, she went upstairs and found the bedroom Rodriguez had prepared. Clean clothes laid out on the bed. Civilian stuff, jeans and a plain black t-shirt, running shoes that looked about her size. A bathroom stocked with basics. A window that overlooked a quiet street where nothing moved except one old man walking a dog. She showered for the first time in 24 hours, letting hot water wash away the hospital smell and the rain and the feeling of Holloway's hand across her face. The bruise had darkened overnight, spreading from her cheekbone down toward her jaw in shades of purple and yellow. Evidence. Proof. The kind of mark that made Holloway's story about her being violent look like exactly what it was, a lie. When she came back downstairs dressed in clothes that didn't smell like antiseptic, Reed was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 coffees and a folder thick enough to be a novel. How'd you get in? I have a key. It's a Navy property. Reed pushed one of the coffees toward her. You sleep okay? Define okay. Fair point. He opened the folder and spread documents across the table. Hospital board met at 6 a.m., voted unanimously to terminate Holloway effective immediately. He's being escorted from the premises as we speak, and his lawyer is already drafting wrongful termination claims that won't go anywhere. Lena sat down and pulled the coffee toward her. What about the assault charge? District attorney is reviewing witness statements. 37 people saw him hit you, and Patterson's testimony is particularly damning since he's hospital security. They'll probably file charges by end of day. Probably isn't definitely. Nothing's definite in the legal system. But Holloway hit a veteran on camera in front of dozens of witnesses. The DA would be committing political suicide if she didn't prosecute. Reed flipped to another document. The hospital is also offering you a settlement. Full back pay, compensation for wrongful termination, coverage for any medical expenses related to the assault, and a formal apology from the board. In exchange for what? Signing an NDA and agreeing not to sue. Lena laughed, a bitter sound that tasted like old coffee. They fire me, their director hits me, and now they want me to stay quiet about it. That's how institutions protect themselves. They throw money at problems until they disappear. Reed met her eyes. But you don't have to take it. You could sue them into the ground and probably win. Wrongful termination, assault, hostile work environment. Their lawyers know it, which is why the settlement offer is generous. How generous? $200,000. The number hung in the air between them. More money than Lena had made in her entire life. Enough to disappear again, find a new city, start over somewhere nobody knew her face. Enough to make the last 24 hours worth something beyond humiliation and pain. What do you think I should do? I think you should talk to Monroe first, then decide whether money is what you actually want out of this. Reed closed the folder. He's awake, by the way. Asking for you. Surgery went well, no complications. He'll be transferred to Naval Medical this afternoon, but he wants to see you before he goes. Lena's hands tightened around the coffee cup. What if I don't want to hear what he has to say? Then don't go, stay here, take the settlement, disappear. Nobody would blame you. Reed paused. But you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what he knew about Kandahar that you didn't. Maybe that's better than knowing. Is it? The question sat between them like a bomb. Lena stared at the table, at the documents spelling out her future in legal language and dollar signs, and thought about the 4 men she'd lost. The ones whose faces she still saw every time she closed her eyes. The ones whose names she'd carved into her memory like scars. What if Monroe knew something that changed the story? What if the ambush wasn't random bad luck, but something preventable? Something someone had screwed up? Something that meant those 4 deaths could have been avoided? Would that make it better or worse? I need to think, she said. Take your time. Monroe's not going anywhere for a few hours. Reed stood and collected his folder. I'll be at the hospital coordinating his transfer. Call the secure phone if you need anything. He left through the front door and Lena sat alone in the silent house, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm, staring at nothing. Outside, the old man with the dog walked past again, moving in his slow morning circuit of the neighborhood. Normal life happening just beyond the windows, while inside everything felt suspended and strange. She picked up the secure phone and stared at Reed's contact information. 1 call, and she'd be on her way to hear whatever truth Monroe was carrying. 1 call, and she'd have to face Kandahar again, drag up memories she'd spent 3 years burying, relive the worst day of her life for the sake of answers she wasn't sure she wanted. She put the phone down and went to the window instead. The media had found the safe house. 2 news vans were parked at the end of the street, cameras pointed toward the house, reporters drinking coffee from thermoses while they waited for something to happen. Someone must have leaked the location, or maybe they'd just followed Reed from the hospital. Either way, her sanctuary had been compromised. Her regular phone buzzed on the counter. She ignored it for 30 seconds, then curiosity won and she checked the screen. 47 missed calls, 193 text messages, 2,847 social media notifications. She scrolled through the texts, watching her life become a spectacle. Reporters offering interviews, lawyers offering to represent her. Random people offering opinions about everything from her service record to her choice of scrubs. Someone had dug up her old Navy photo, the one from her service file, and posted it alongside the video of her kneeling in the hospital. Young Lena in dress blues, fresh-faced and naive, compared to older Lena covered in blood. Hero nurse fired for doing her job. Combat veteran assaulted by hospital director the woman. They couldn't silence. The headlines made her sick. She wasn't a hero. She was someone who'd failed to save 4 men and spent 3 years running from that failure. The fact that she'd managed to help one old veteran didn't erase everything else. Another text came through, this one from a number she recognized. Patterson, the security guard. Holloway's been arrested. Charges filed an hour ago. Assault and battery. Thought you should know. Then another, from someone claiming to be a producer at CNN. We'd like to offer you an exclusive interview. Your story deserves to be heard. Name your price. Lena threw the phone across the room. It bounced off the couch and landed on the carpet, screen still glowing with incoming messages. She couldn't do this. Couldn't be the person everyone wanted her to be. Couldn't carry the weight of their expectations and their hero worship and their need for her to be something more than just broken. The secure phone rang. She picked it up without thinking. What? It's Monroe. His voice was rough, probably from the breathing tube during surgery, but steady. Reed said you got my note. I got it. You coming to see me or not? Lena looked out at the news vans, at her phone still lighting up with messages, at the life she'd tried to build crumbling around her like sand. I don't know what you think you can tell me that'll make any difference. I know who gave the order that sent your unit into that ambush. The world stopped. Lena's hand tightened on the phone hard enough to hurt. What are you talking about? I know who signed off on Operation Sandstorm. I know who approved the coordinates. I know who ignored intelligence reports that said the area was compromised. Monroe paused. And I know that person is still giving orders that are getting people killed. You're lying. I wish I was. But I've got documentation, Corman. Real files, not the sanitized version they showed you. And if you want to know why 4 good men died for no reason, you need to get to this hospital before they transfer me and lock everything down. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve better than what they gave you. And because the person responsible is about to be promoted to a position where they can do even more damage. Monroe's voice dropped. You want to spend the rest of your life thinking you failed those men? Or do you want to know who actually failed them? Lena's vision tunneled. Her breathing came too fast, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 years of guilt and pain and sleepless nights, and now this stranger was telling her it wasn't random, that someone had sent her unit into danger knowingly, that 4 men had died not because of bad luck, but because of bad decisions. Who? Come to the hospital. I'll show you everything. Tell me now. I can't. Not over the phone. This information is classified so far above my pay grade that even talking about it could land me in Leavenworth. The only reason I'm telling you is because you were there, which gives you standing. Monroe coughed, and she could hear pain in the sound. Reed will escort you. He's got the clearance to see the files too. But you need to move now because once they transfer me to Naval Medical, this window closes. Why does it close? Because the person I'm talking about has friends in high places. And they've already made 2 calls asking why I'm at a civilian hospital instead of on a military base where information can be controlled. Lena's hands were shaking again. She pressed them flat against the table, trying to steady herself, trying to think through the rage and confusion and sudden, desperate hope that maybe she hadn't failed after all. If you're lying to me, I'm not. I've got nothing to gain from lying. I'm a 70-year-old retired chief with a hole in his head. All I want is for you to know the truth before they bury it again. Monroe's voice softened. You saved my life last night. Let me return the favor. The line went dead. Lena stood in the kitchen of the safe house, surrounded by the debris of her old life, holding a phone connected to a man who claimed he could give her answers. Every instinct told her it was a trap, that no one gave up classified information to a discharged medic with PTSD and a bad habit of running away from problems. But what if he was telling the truth? She grabbed the secure phone and called Reed. He answered on the first ring. Monroe just called. I know. He called me right after. You coming? He says someone gave orders that got my unit killed. He told me the same thing, and he's got files that back it up. Reed paused. I've seen some of what he's talking about, Lena, enough to know he's not making this up. Why would anyone send a unit into a known ambush? That's a question for Monroe, but we need to move fast. His transfer orders just came through and they're marked urgent. Someone wants him on a military base where information can be contained. How long do I have? 2 hours, maybe less. I'm sending a car. There are reporters outside. The car will handle them. Just be ready to move. Lena hung up and stood there for 30 seconds, processing. Then she went upstairs, changed into clothes that didn't make her feel like a victim, and came back down to wait. The coffee was cold now, but she drank it anyway, needing something to do with her hands. The secure phone buzzed with a text from Reed. Car outside. Driver knows where to go. She looked out the window and saw a black SUV identical to the one Reed had used last night. The driver was in civilian clothes, but moved with military precision as he stepped out and scanned the street. The news vans had noticed him too, and reporters were already climbing out with cameras. Lena took a breath, opened the front door, and walked into chaos. Ms. Graves, can we get a statement? How do you feel about Director Holloway's arrest? Are you going to sue the hospital? What was it like serving in Afghanistan? The driver moved in front of her like a wall, blocking cameras with his body while guiding her toward the SUV. She kept her head down, said nothing, and climbed into the back seat. The driver slammed the door and rounded to his side, and they were moving before the reporters could surround the vehicle. They've been out here since 5 a.m., the driver said. He was maybe 30, short hair, the kind of calm that came from dealing with worse things than journalists. Commander Reed says you're not talking to media. That's right. Good call. They'll twist anything you say anyway. They drove through morning traffic toward Riverside Memorial, and Lena watched Greymont City scroll past like a film she'd seen before. The buildings looked the same. The people looked the same. But something fundamental had shifted, and she couldn't quite name what it was. Her phone buzzed again. She pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. Drop this. Walk away. Take the settlement and forget you ever heard of Kandahar. This is the only warning you'll get. Lena stared at the message, her blood going cold. Someone was threatening her. Someone knew she was digging into Operation Sandstorm and wanted her to stop. She showed the text to the driver. You see this? He glanced at the screen and his expression went hard. Forward that to Commander Reed. Now. She did, and Reed called back immediately. Where are you? 5 minutes from the hospital. Gav. That text came from a burner phone, probably untraceable. Someone's watching you. Reed's voice was tight. Change of plans. We're moving Monroe now. Meet us at the loading dock on the east side, not the main entrance. There's too much exposure out front. What's happening? Someone wants to keep you from talking to Monroe, which means he's telling the truth about what he knows. Reed paused. Watch your six, Corman. The line went dead. The driver accelerated, weaving through traffic with the kind of controlled aggression that suggested military driver training. They bypassed the main hospital entrance and swung around to a loading area where ambulances and delivery trucks usually parked. Reed was waiting with 4 sailors in tactical gear, standing around a gurney where Monroe lay, looking annoyed at being moved. About time, Monroe said when he saw Lena. I was starting to think you'd chickened out. Someone just threatened me. Yeah, they'll do that. Come on, we're going somewhere more secure. Reed gestured, and 2 of the sailors wheeled Monroe's gurney toward a waiting ambulance. Not a civilian one, but military markings, armored plating visible under the paint job. The kind of transport used when someone needed protection, not just medical care. Get in, Reed told Lena. She climbed into the ambulance where Monroe was being secured with straps that looked more like restraints than safety equipment. Reed followed and pulled the doors closed behind them. One of the sailors took the driver's seat and they were moving again, fast, heading away from the hospital towards somewhere Lena didn't recognize. Where are we going? Naval Reserve Station 15 miles north, secure facility with SCIF capabilities. Reed pulled out his tablet. Monroe's files are classified top secret, which means we can't view them in a civilian hospital. We need proper security infrastructure. Monroe shifted on the gurney, his face pale but determined. How much did they tell you about Operation Sandstorm? Just that it was a reconnaissance mission that went bad. Wrong coordinates, walked into an ambush. That's the official story. The real story is that Command knew the area was hostile. They had drone footage showing insurgent activity. They had intercepts of radio chatter planning an attack. They had everything they needed to scrub the mission or reroute your unit. Then why didn't they? Monroe looked at Reed. You want to tell her, or should I? Reed's jaw was tight. Because someone wanted proof that the area was compromised. They sent your unit in as bait to draw out the enemy and confirm intelligence reports. The words hit Lena like bullets. She stared at Reed, then at Monroe, waiting for one of them to say they were joking, that this was some kind of test, that no one would deliberately send 8 people into a trap just to prove a point. You're lying. I wish I was. Monroe pulled a tablet from beneath his blanket. Apparently he'd been prepared for this conversation. These are the files, drone footage from the day before your mission showing enemy positions exactly where you ended up. Intercepted communications warning about planned attacks, and the operation order signed by Captain Reeves approving the mission despite all the warnings. He turned the tablet so Lena could see. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Figures moving through the same terrain she remembered from Kandahar, setting up positions, preparing weapons. The timestamp was 14 hours before her unit had arrived. Command knew, she said quietly. Command knew, and they sent you anyway because they needed confirmation for a larger operation. Your unit was the tripwire. Monroe scrolled to another document. After the ambush, they classified everything and buried the reports. Made it look like intelligence failure instead of calculated risk. Lena's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. Who signed off on this? Captain Reeves. He's Admiral Reeves now, up for promotion to fleet commander. If that goes through, he'll have authority over a third of the Navy's combat operations. The ambulance hit a bump, and Lena grabbed the wall to steady herself. Her mind was racing, trying to process what Monroe was telling her. That 4 men had died, not because she wasn't good enough, but because someone in command had decided their lives were acceptable losses. that she'd spent 3 years drowning in guilt for something that was never her fault. Why are you telling me this now? Because Reeves is getting promoted next month, and once he's got that star, this information gets buried forever. He'll have the authority to classify anything related to his past operations, and no one will be able to touch him. Monroe met her eyes. You're the only one with standing to challenge this. You were there. You lost people. Your testimony could stop the promotion and force a real investigation. They'll destroy me. Probably. Reeves has connections all the way to the Joint Chiefs. He can make your life hell. Monroe's voice was hard. But he can also keep sending people into ambushes if no one stops him. And the next unit that gets sacrificed won't have someone like you trying to save them. The ambulance pulled through a gate and stopped in a parking lot surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The Naval Reserve Station was exactly what Reed had promised. Secure, isolated, the kind of place where classified conversations happened behind closed doors. They wheeled Monroe inside, past armed guards who checked Reed's credentials twice, through corridors that smelled like military facilities everywhere, floor wax and recycled air and the peculiar tension of people doing important work. They ended up in a small room with no windows, just a table, chairs, and computer equipment that looked expensive and secure. Reed locked the door behind them and activated some kind of jamming equipment. This room is SCIF certified. Everything said here is protected. We've got 2 hours before I have to file a report on Monroe's location, so talk fast. Monroe transferred his files to the room's secure computer and pulled up document after document. Operation orders, intelligence reports, after-action summaries. Every piece of evidence showing that Captain Reeves had known the mission was compromised and sent Lena's unit anyway. These files were classified by Reeves himself after the ambush, Monroe said. I only got access because I was part of the review board that investigated the incident. Most of the board voted to accept the intelligence failure explanation. 3 of us objected, but we were overruled. Why didn't you go public? Because we're military. Chain of command matters. And Reeves convinced enough people that the mission was necessary despite the risks. Monroe pulled up a final document. But here's what changed my mind. This is a memo from Reeves to CENTCOM 6 months after your ambush. He references Operation Sandstorm as a successful proof of concept for using small units to confirm hostile areas before committing larger forces. Lena read the memo twice, her vision blurring. Reeves had called it successful. 4 men dead, 4 more wounded, her entire unit destroyed, and he'd written a memo praising the concept. He killed them on purpose. He sacrificed them for what he considered a greater tactical objective, and he's been doing it ever since. Monroe closed the file. There have been 3 more operations in the last 2 years with similar patterns. Small units sent into questionable areas with minimal support. High casualties, but the intelligence gathered was considered valuable. How many people have died? 17 that I can confirm, probably more. The number sat in the room like a weight. 17 people dead because one admiral thought their lives were worth less than the information they could provide. 17 families destroyed. 17 ghosts that no one wanted to acknowledge. Reed had been silent through all of this, but now he spoke. If you testify about what you know, it'll trigger an investigation. Reeves's promotion will be suspended pending review. The operations he approved will be examined, and everyone involved will face questions about why this was allowed to happen. And I'll be the one who broke ranks, who violated chain of command, who accused a superior officer of murder. Yes. They'll court-martial me. Dishonorable discharge, jail time, the whole thing. Probably not. You're already discharged, which puts you outside military justice for most purposes. But they'll destroy your reputation, make sure you never work in medicine again, and paint you as a disgruntled veteran who couldn't hack it. Reed met her eyes. You'll become the villain in their story so Reeves can stay the hero. Lena stood and walked to the corner of the small room where the walls felt like they were closing in. She thought about the settlement offer from the hospital, $200,000 and an NDA. Enough money to disappear and never think about any of this again. She thought about the 4 men she'd lost. Williams, Garcia, Kowalski, Tran. Names she'd carved into her memory and carried for 3 years like stones in her chest. She thought about the 17 others who'd died since then. People she'd never met, never tried to save, never even known existed until Monroe had shown her the files. What happens if I don't testify? Reeves gets his promotion. Operation Sandstorm stays buried, and the next time someone gets sent into an ambush because an admiral wanted confirmation of intelligence, no one will question it. Monroe's voice was gentle. You'll have your money and your anonymity, but you'll know. I already know. Yeah, but knowing you could have stopped it and knowing you chose not to are different things. Lena closed her eyes. She'd spent 3 years running from Kandahar, trying to forget the sounds of men dying, trying to forgive herself for not being good enough. And now someone was telling her it wasn't her fault, that she'd been set up to fail, that the guilt she carried was manufactured by people who cared more about career advancement than human lives. Being right wouldn't make the dead any less dead, but it might stop more people from joining them. She opened her eyes and looked at Monroe. If I do this, I need everything. Every file, every communication, every piece of evidence that shows Reeves knew what he was doing. I need enough to make the case ironclad because I'm only getting one shot at this. Monroe smiled. Already compiled. Reed's got access to the full package. And I need protection. If they threaten me this morning, they'll do worse once I go public. Already arranged, Reed said. Full security detail until the investigation concludes. Witness protection if necessary. And I want immunity from prosecution for anything related to this. I'm not going to jail for telling the truth. I'll make the call to JAG as soon as we're done here. Lena looked between them, these two men who'd decided she was worth saving, worth protecting, worth giving the truth to, even though it would destroy lives and careers, and the neat story the Navy had built around Operation Sandstorm. Okay, she said, I'll testify. Reed pulled out his phone and made a call. This is Commander Reed, authorization code 7 Delta 49er. I need to speak with the Inspector General's office immediately. I have a witness with information about classified operations involving current flag officers. While Reed talked, Monroe reached out and grabbed Lena's hand. His grip was weak from surgery but steady. You're doing the right thing, Corpsman. The right thing is going to ruin my life. Maybe. Or maybe it'll give you a chance to stop running. Monroe squeezed her hand once. Those 4 men you lost? They'd be proud of you right now. Lena wanted to believe him. Wanted to think that Williams and Garcia and Kowalski and Tran would approve of her dragging their deaths into the light, forcing the Navy to admit they'd been sacrificed for nothing. But she'd never know what they would have wanted because they were gone, and she was still here, and that was the reality she had to live with. Reed hung up. Inspector General wants to meet with you in 2 hours. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. We fly out in 30 minutes. That fast? They know this is time sensitive. Reeves's promotion ceremony is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. If we're going to stop it, we need to move. Reed started packing up the files. You ready for this? Lena thought about Holloway, arrested and facing charges for hitting her. Thought about the hospital board scrambling to cover their asses after firing her. Thought about how satisfying it had been to watch powerful people face consequences for treating someone as disposable. Now she was about to do the same thing to an admiral. I'm ready. They left the SCIF and headed back to the ambulance. Outside, the morning had turned bright and clear, the kind of day that made everything feel possible. But Lena felt the weight of what she was about to do settling on her shoulders like armor. The ambulance took them to a small airfield where a Navy transport plane waited on the tarmac. Not commercial, not civilian, military. The kind of flight that didn't appear on any schedule. Monroe was transferred to a medical bay inside the aircraft, and Lena found herself strapped into a seat that faced backward, the way military transports always made passengers sit. Reed sat across from her, his expression unreadable. The plane taxied and lifted off, and Greymont City disappeared below them. Lena watched through the small window as everything she'd built in the last 2 years became smaller and smaller until it vanished completely. You okay? Reed asked. No. Fair enough. They flew in silence for an hour before Reed's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his face went carefully blank. What? Admiral Reeves just requested an emergency meeting with the Secretary of the Navy. He's moving fast. He knows. Someone told him, which means we've got a leak. Reed typed something on his phone. I'm having you move to full protection as soon as we land. No more safe houses, naval base housing, armed guards, the whole protocol. He can't actually hurt me, can he? Reed looked at her for a long moment before answering. He's an admiral with 30 years of connections and favors owed. He can make a lot of things happen if he wants to badly enough. The plane hit turbulence and Lena's stomach dropped. She gripped the armrests and thought about turning around, calling this off, taking the settlement money and disappearing into a new life where she didn't have to fight admirals or testify about dead friends. But she'd already run once. She'd spent 3 years being nobody, going nowhere, helping no one. And it had hollowed her out until there was nothing left but guilt and ghosts. Maybe it was time to stop running. The plane landed at Norfolk Naval Station 2 hours later, taxiing directly to a secure hangar where 3 black SUVs waited with enough armed personnel to invade a small country. Reed's security detail had multiplied. "We're taking this seriously," Reed said as they disembarked. Apparently. They drove through the base to a building marked only with numbers, no sign indicating what happened inside. The Inspector General's office, apparently, where careers came to die and scandals got investigated behind closed doors. Lena was escorted to a conference room where a woman in civilian clothes waited behind a laptop. She was maybe 50, gray hair pulled back, the kind of face that had seen too many ugly truths. "Hospital Corpsman, second-class Graves. I'm Diane Mercer, Deputy Inspector General. Please sit down." Lena sat. Reed moved to stand by the door. "I've reviewed the preliminary files Commander Reed sent over. If what you're claiming is true, this is one of the most serious allegations against a flag officer in the last decade." Mercer opened her laptop. "I need you to walk me through everything. Start with the day of the ambush and don't leave anything out." So Lena talked. For 3 hours, she described Kandahar in detail. She hadn't let herself remember in years. The heat, the dust, the sound of gunfire echoing off canyon walls. The way Williams had looked at her when he realized he wasn't going to make it. The feeling of Garcia's pulse stopping under her fingers despite everything she tried. Mercer recorded it all, asking questions that cut through emotion to get at tactical details. What orders had they received? What intelligence briefing had preceded the mission? Who had approved the route? What communications had been available? Lena answered everything. When she was done, Mercer sat back and looked at her like she was seeing someone new. "You understand that if you're lying about any of this, you'll face federal charges for making false statements and obstruction." "I'm not lying." "You understand that Admiral Reeves will have the best lawyers in the country defending him." "I understand." "And you understand that even if everything you're saying is true, there's a possibility the Navy will close ranks and protect him anyway, because the alternative is admitting they've been covering up operational malfeasance for 3 years." "I understand that too." Mercer closed her laptop. "Then I'll begin the formal investigation. You'll be assigned a JAG attorney to represent your interests. You'll remain on base under protection until we've gathered sufficient evidence to either support or refute your claims. And you'll make yourself available for additional questioning as needed." "How long will that take?" "Weeks, maybe months." Mercer stood. "In the meantime, Admiral Reeves will be informed that he's under investigation. His promotion will be suspended, and every operation he's authorized in the last 5 years will be reviewed." She left the room, and Lena sat there feeling like she'd just jumped off a cliff and was waiting to see if the parachute would open. Reed moved from the door and sat down across from her. "You did good, Corpsman." "I just ended my life." "You just saved lives, potentially dozens of them." Reed pulled out his tablet. "Monroe wants to see you before they transfer him to the medical wing. Says he's got one more thing to tell you." "What thing?" "He wouldn't say. But knowing Monroe, it's probably important." They walked through the base to the medical building where Monroe had been set up in a private room with enough monitoring equipment to run a small hospital. He looked worse than he had that morning, exhausted from the flight and the surgery and the weight of carrying secrets. "You did it," Monroe said when he saw Lena. "I heard Mercer's already pulling files." "Yeah." "Reeves is going to come after you, you know that." "Everyone keeps saying that." "I wanted to give you something." Monroe reached for the table beside his bed and pulled out a worn notebook. "This is my personal log from the review board that investigated Sandstorm. Names, dates, conversations. Everything I observed during the process, including who was pushing to bury the evidence." He handed it to Lena and she opened it to find pages of detailed notes in neat handwriting. Names she recognized, names she didn't. Documentation of every meeting, every decision, every moment when the board had chosen to protect Reeves instead of honoring the truth. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because if something happens to me, I want someone to have the full story. And because you're the only person I trust to use it the right way." Monroe smiled slightly. You're a good medic, Graves. One of the best I've seen. Don't let the brass make you forget that. Lena held the notebook like it might explode. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This fight is just getting started. Reed's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his expression went dark. We need to go. Now. What happened? Admiral Reeves just held a press conference. He's claiming you're a disgruntled veteran, making false accusations to get attention. And he's got 3 admirals backing him up. Lena's stomach dropped. He went public? He's controlling the narrative before we can build a case, making you look like the problem instead of him. Reed grabbed her arm. Come on, we need to get you somewhere secure before the media finds you. They rushed through the building toward the waiting SUVs, but they were already too late. A crowd had gathered at the gate. Reporters with cameras, protesters with signs, people screaming about honor and truth and justice. The base security was holding them back, but barely. Lena could see her face on someone's phone screen, enlarged, dissected, turned into the story everyone wanted to tell. Hero or villain, victim or liar, depending on who was doing the talking. The SUV pulled up, and Reed shoved her inside. They drove away from the medical building toward housing on the far side of the base, away from the gates and the crowds and the chaos. But even there, Lena could feel it. The weight of what she'd started. The machine she'd just stuck her hand into, knowing it would probably take her arm off. Reed's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his face went pale. Understood. We'll implement immediately. He hung up and looked at Lena. That was Mercer. Someone just leaked your home address to the media. Your old apartment in Graymont is surrounded. And there's been a credible threat made against you by someone claiming to be a former Navy SEAL. Lena stared at him. This is happening fast. Reeves is playing for keeps. He's mobilizing every asset he has to destroy your credibility before the investigation can gain momentum. Reed's jaw was tight. You're officially in witness protection as of right now. New identity, new location, complete lockdown until this resolves. I don't get a choice? You're a material witness in a federal investigation, and there's a credible threat against your life. No, you don't get a choice. The SUV stopped in front of a nondescript building with armed guards at the entrance. Lena was escorted inside, through security checkpoints, into a suite that looked like a prison cell with better furniture. Reed stopped at the door. I'll check on you tomorrow. In the meantime, don't leave this room and don't contact anyone outside secure channels. We can't risk Reeves finding you. What about Monroe? He's being moved to a secure facility tonight. Same protocol. Reed left and the door locked behind him with a sound that felt permanent. Lena stood in the middle of the small room, surrounded by walls that were supposed to keep her safe, but felt more like a cage. Her phone, her real phone, not the secure one, sat on the table where someone had placed it. She picked it up and saw thousands of new messages. Death threats, support messages, interview requests, conspiracy theories. Everyone had an opinion about whether she was telling the truth or destroying a good man's career. One message caught her eye from an unknown number. You should have taken the settlement. Now you'll lose everything. Then her phone died. Not the battery. The whole device just went black and wouldn't turn back on. Someone had bricked it remotely. Lena sat on the edge of the narrow bed and realized with perfect clarity that she'd just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the United States military. And he was already winning. The dead phone sat in Lena's hand like evidence of how far Reeves was willing to go. She placed it on the table and stared at the locked door, at the walls closing in, at the future she'd just traded for the truth. 40 minutes later, the door opened and a woman in Navy JAG uniform entered carrying a briefcase that looked like it had survived several deployments. She was maybe 40, sharp eyes behind wire-frame glasses, the kind of lawyer who'd seen enough courtrooms to know when someone was lying. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Voss, I've been assigned as your counsel. She sat down across from Lena without waiting for an invitation. I've reviewed your testimony and Monroe's files. We need to talk about what happens next. Reeves destroys me and walks away. That's one outcome. Here's another. We build an airtight case that forces the Navy to choose between protecting one admiral and maintaining any shred of institutional credibility. Voss opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet. Reeves made a mistake going public this fast. He's claiming you're lying, which means every statement he makes can be used against him when we prove you're telling the truth. How do we prove that? By finding the people who helped him cover it up. Every conspiracy needs conspirators. Voss pulled up a document. Monroe's notebook mentions 3 other members of the review board who objected to burying the Sandstorm report. We find them, get their testimony, and suddenly Reeves isn't facing one disgruntled medic. He's facing multiple senior personnel contradicting his story. Won't they be scared to come forward? They already are. 2 of them contacted Mercer's office this morning after seeing the news. They're ready to testify. Voss smiled slightly. Reeves thought going public would intimidate witnesses. Instead, it gave them permission to speak. Lena felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something closer to possibility. What about the third person? Still trying to locate him, Captain James Barlow, now retired. He was the most vocal critic on the review board according to Monroe's notes. If we can find him, his testimony alone might be enough to stop Reeves's promotion permanently. And then what? He gets a slap on the wrist and early retirement with full pension? Voss's expression hardened. If we prove he knowingly sent people to die and covered it up, he faces court-martial. Dereliction of duty, conduct unbecoming, possibly manslaughter depending on how aggressive the prosecution wants to be. He'd lose everything: rank, pension, reputation. Probably serve time at Leavenworth. The weight of that settled over the room. Lena thought about the 4 men she'd lost and the 17 more who'd died since. Thought about Williams's wife getting a folded flag and lies about how her husband died a hero. Thought about whether prison was enough punishment for someone who'd treated human lives like game pieces. I want him in prison. Then we need to find Barlow. Voss stood. In the meantime, you stay here. Don't talk to anyone except through secure channels. Reeves has people watching for any mistake you make. She left and Lena was alone again with nothing but time to think. She lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, counting tiles, trying not to remember Kandahar. But the memories came anyway, the way they always did when she stopped moving long enough for them to catch up. 3 days passed in the locked room. Voss visited twice with updates. Barlow was still missing, Mercer's investigation was expanding, Reeves had hired 3 different law firms to defend him. Reed came once with food that wasn't military rations, and news that Monroe was recovering well at a secure facility somewhere Lena wasn't cleared to know about. He asks about you every day, Reed said. Wants to make sure you're holding up. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar, Corman. Good thing I'm not lying about Reeves, then. Reed almost smiled. Media's having a field day with this. Half the country thinks you're a hero, half thinks you're trying to destroy a decorated officer. The Senate Armed Services Committee is already making noise about holding hearings. That good or bad? Depends on who controls the narrative. Right now, it's a toss-up. Reed paused. There's something else. The hospital settlement offer has been increased. $300,000 now. They want this to go away before it gets connected to the Reeves investigation. They think I'll take money and shut up. Will you? Lena looked at him. I already made my choice. On the 4th day, Voss burst into the room with an expression that was either triumph or panic. We found Barlow. Where? Montana. Living off-grid in a cabin with no phone, no internet, no contact with the outside world. Mercer sent 2 investigators to his location. He's being transported here now. Will he testify? According to the investigators, he's been waiting 3 years for someone to ask. Voss pulled up her tablet. But there's a complication. Reeves just filed a motion claiming national security concerns. He's arguing that any testimony about Operation Sandstorm would reveal classified intelligence methods and endanger ongoing operations. That's bullshit. Correct. But it's bullshit that'll tie up the investigation for weeks while lawyers argue over classification levels and security clearances. Voss sat down. Unless we can prove Reeves is using classification as a shield to hide criminal conduct, which means we need Barlow's testimony before Reeves can get it blocked. How long until he arrives? 6 hours. Mercer's fast-tracking the deposition. Voss leaned forward. This is the turning point, Lena. If Barlow backs up everything Monroe said, if he can provide documentation showing Reeves knew about the ambush and sent your unit anyway, the Navy won't be able to protect him anymore. Too many witnesses, too much evidence. And if Barlow doesn't show or changes his mind, then we're back to your word against an admiral's, and that's a fight we'll probably lose. The 6 hours crawled past like days. Lena paced the small room, tried to eat food she couldn't taste, lay on the bed staring at ceiling tiles she'd already memorized. She thought about Barlow flying across the country to testify about things that could end his own career. Thought about whether she'd have the courage to do the same if positions were reversed. Finally, Voss returned. "He's here. Mercer wants you in the room when she takes his statement." "Why?" "Because Barlow specifically asked to meet the medic from Kandahar. Said he needs to see the person he's doing this for." They walked through the building to a conference room where Barlow sat across from Mercer and a court reporter. He was maybe 60, weathered face and gray hair, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that looked like they'd come straight from a Montana cabin. But his eyes were sharp and clear, and when Lena entered, he stood with military precision. "Hospital Corpsman Graves. Captain Barlow." "Just James now. Haven't been captain for 3 years. He gestured to an empty chair. "Sit. I want to look at you while I do this." Lena sat. Mercer nodded to the court reporter, and the deposition began. For 2 hours, Barlow described the review board in detail that matched Monroe's notes exactly. How Reeves had pressured board members to accept the intelligence failure explanation. How 3 admirals had backed him up with vague references to operational necessity. How Barlow and 2 others had objected and been quietly reassigned to positions where they couldn't cause problems. "I resigned my commission rather than stay silent," Barlow said. "Some things matter more than rank." Mercer pulled up documents on her laptop. "Can you identify this operation order?" Barlow studied the screen. "That's the order authorizing Operation Sandstorm, signed by then-Captain Reeves 12 hours before launch. I reviewed this during the investigation." "And what did you observe about the attached intelligence reports?" "They showed hostile activity in the target area. Drone footage, communications intercepts, everything indicating the location was compromised. Reeves signed off anyway." Barlow looked at Lena. "He sent your unit into a known trap because he needed proof for a larger operation he was planning. Used 8 people as bait to confirm what the drones had already shown him." "Did you raise these concerns with your superiors?" "I did. I was told operational decisions were above my authority and to confine my review to procedural compliance." Barlow's voice went hard. "I was also told that making waves could affect my career advancement. I made waves anyway and got exactly what they promised." Mercer typed notes. "Would you be willing to testify to all of this under oath before a court-martial board?" "I'd testify in Times Square if it meant stopping Reeves. That man has been sacrificing sailors for career advancement for a decade. Kandahar was just the first time someone survived to tell the story." The deposition continued for another hour, Barlow providing names and dates and documentation that corroborated everything Monroe had claimed. By the time Mercer called a break, the case against Reeves had gone from possible to inevitable. Barlow stood and walked over to where Lena sat. "I read the after-action report from Kandahar. What you did that day, keeping 4 men alive under those conditions, that's the kind of thing they give medals for. They gave me a discharge. They gave you a medical discharge with honors after you spent 4 months in physical therapy. Not the same thing." Barlow's expression softened. "I also read the psychiatric evaluation they buried in your file. You blamed yourself for the men who died. Thought you weren't good enough, fast enough, skilled enough. I wasn't. You were exactly good enough to save half your unit when the odds said everyone should have died. And you did it despite being sent into a trap by someone who knew better." Barlow gripped her shoulder. "Those 4 deaths aren't on you, Corpsman. They're on Reeves, and now he's going to answer for them." Lena's throat was too tight to speak. She nodded, and Barlow squeezed her shoulder once before walking back to face Mercer again. The deposition concluded an hour later with Barlow signing a stack of documents while the court reporter certified everything. Mercer gathered her files with an expression of grim satisfaction. "This is enough. I'm recommending immediate suspension of Admiral Reeves pending court-martial proceedings. The evidence is overwhelming." She looked at Lena. "You did it. You actually did it. He's not convicted yet." "No, but his promotion is dead, his career is finished, and he's facing decades in prison. That's as close to justice as the military system gets." Voss escorted Lena back to her room, where news was already breaking on the television someone had installed. CNN was running footage of Reeves being escorted from his office by Shore Patrol while reporters shouted questions. His face was pale, his uniform somehow diminished, the authority he'd carried for 30 years evaporating in real time. Admiral suspended amid investigation into combat deaths. Witnesses testify about Kandahar cover-up. Decorated officer faces court-martial. The headlines felt surreal. Lena sat on the bed and watched the man who'd killed 4 of her friends walk past cameras in handcuffs and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, just exhaustion. Her secure phone rang. Reed's voice came through clear. "You're seeing this?" "Yeah." Reeves' lawyers are already claiming he's being railroaded by a political witch hunt, but it's not going to work. Too many witnesses, too much documentation. Mercer's recommending charges by the end of the week. What happens to me? You go home, back to whatever life you want to build. The investigation doesn't need you anymore. Reed paused. Hospital called. They want to offer you your job back. Director position, actually, running the ER trauma department. 3 times your old salary, full benefits, public apology. Lena laughed bitterly. They fire me and hit me, and now they want me to run the place. That's how it works. You became more valuable than they realized. I don't want to work for people who didn't value me until I became inconvenient to ignore. So don't. You've got settlement money, you've got a story every hospital in the country wants, you've got options. Reed's voice softened. What do you want, Lena? She looked at the television, where they were replaying footage of her kneeling beside Monroe, blood on her hands, doing the only thing she'd ever been good at, helping someone who needed help. I want to train people, combat medics, ER nurses, anyone who might end up in a situation where someone's life depends on them being good enough. I want to make sure the next person in my position actually has the skills to save everyone. I can make that happen. Navy's always looking for qualified instructors, or I can connect you with civilian programs. Let me think about it. She hung up and sat in the quiet room, processing everything that had happened in the last week. Fired, assaulted, threatened, hidden away, turned into a national story. And somehow, despite all of it, she'd won. Reeves was finished. Holloway was arrested. The hospital was begging for her return. And all those people who dismissed her as nobody special now knew exactly who she'd been all along. The door opened and Voss entered with a final stack of paperwork. Settlement from the hospital needs your signature. They've agreed to everything we asked for. Full back pay, compensation, medical coverage, and most importantly, no NDA. You can talk about what happened whenever you want. Lena read through the documents, seeing dollar amounts that would let her do whatever she wanted for the next few years. She signed everything and handed it back. What about Reeves's court-martial? Scheduled for 3 months from now. You'll need to testify, but it'll be brief. With Barlow and Monroe backing you up, your testimony is just confirmation. Voss hesitated. There's one more thing. The families of the men who died in Kandahar have been contacting Mercer's office. They want to meet you. Lena's chest went tight. Why? Because you tried to save their husbands and sons and brothers. Because you've been carrying guilt that wasn't yours to carry. And because now they know the truth about what happened. Voss pulled out a letter. This is from William's widow. She asked me to give it to you. Lena took the letter with shaking hands. The envelope was simple, addressed in neat handwriting to Corman Lena Graves. She opened it and read, Dear Lena, I never blamed you for my husband's death. The Navy told me he died serving his country, and I believed that because I needed to believe something. But now I know the truth, that he died because someone sent him into danger for the wrong reasons. I also know that you tried everything to save him, that you stayed with him until the end, that you carried his memory for 3 years while blaming yourself for something that was never your fault. Thank you for fighting for the truth. Thank you for making sure his death means something. And thank you for being there when he needed someone. You're a hero, whether you believe it or not. Michelle Williams. Lena read the letter twice, her vision blurring, 3 years of grief and guilt cracking open. She'd spent so long thinking William's widow must hate her for failing to save him. Never imagined the woman might be grateful she'd tried. Voss gave her a moment, then spoke quietly. Garcia's mother wants to meet you too, and Kowalski's father. They're flying in for the court-martial and they'd like to talk beforehand. I don't know if I can face them. You don't have to, but they specifically asked, said you're part of their story now, whether any of you wanted it or not. Lena folded the letter carefully and tucked it in her pocket. I'll think about it. 2 weeks later, Lena stood outside Riverside Memorial Hospital, watching morning light glint off windows where she'd once worked. The media had finally moved on to newer scandals, but she could still see the spot where she'd knelt beside Monroe, the place where everything had changed. Patterson, the security guard, was waiting by the entrance in his uniform, no longer looking at the ground. "Heard you're coming back as director." "No, I turned them down." His eyebrows rose. "They're offering a fortune." "I know. But working for people who only valued me after I became famous isn't the same as working for people who valued me when I was nobody." Lena looked up at the building. "Is Monroe still here?" "Transferred out 2 days ago. Left something for you at the desk, though." Lena walked inside where nurses she'd worked with for 2 years suddenly wanted to talk, suddenly remembered her name, suddenly acted like they'd been friends all along. She ignored them and went to the front desk where an envelope waited with her name on it. Inside was a challenge coin, the kind sailors carried to prove unit affiliation, and a note in Monroe's handwriting, "Corman Graves, you saved my life twice. Once on that floor, once by having the guts to tell the truth when everyone else wanted you to shut up. The Navy owes you more than it can repay. This coin belonged to a chief who saved my life 30 years ago in a place I'm not allowed to talk about. He told me to pass it on to someone who understood what it meant to put the mission above yourself. You earned it. Fair winds and following seas." Chief Monroe. Lena held the coin in her palm, feeling the weight of history and honor and something she'd thought she'd lost in Kandahar. Monroe had given her proof that she'd never stopped being a medic, even when she'd tried to hide from it. She walked out of the hospital into sunlight that felt warmer than it had in years. Reed was waiting by his SUV, no longer in uniform, but civilian clothes that made him look almost human. "Thought you might need a ride." "Where to?" "Wherever you want. I've got the day off." Reed opened the passenger door. "Monroe asked me to make sure you actually take time to figure out what comes next instead of immediately throwing yourself into another job where you disappear. I'm not good at taking time." "I noticed. Do it anyway." They drove through Graymont City while Lena watched familiar streets roll past. The diner where she'd eaten breakfast alone for 2 years. The park where she'd walked when her apartment felt too small. The life she'd built on isolation and anonymity and the careful practice of being nobody. Reed's phone buzzed. He checked it and smiled. "Court-martial date is confirmed. 3 months. Reeves's lawyers tried to get it delayed, but the convening authority denied the motion. He's really going to trial. He's really going to prison." Barlow's testimony was damning enough, but 2 other board members came forward yesterday with evidence Reeves destroyed documents related to the Sandstorm review. That's obstruction, tampering, and about 6 other charges. Reed glanced at her. "You won, Lena." "Doesn't feel like winning." "That's because winning costs something. You paid with 3 years of guilt and a week of hell, but you stopped Reeves from killing more people, you cleared your name, and you proved that the truth matters even when powerful people want it buried." They stopped at a coffee shop Lena had never been brave enough to enter. Too many people, too much small talk, too much risk of being seen. Reed ordered for both of them, and they sat by the window watching the city wake up. "What happens after the trial?" Lena asked. "Reeves goes to prison, Holloway goes to prison, the hospital implements new policies, and you get to decide who you want to be now that you're not running anymore." Lena sipped her coffee and thought about training medics, about teaching people to be better than she'd been, about turning 3 years of guilt into something useful. She thought about William's widow calling her a hero, and Monroe giving her a challenge coin, and Barlow flying across the country to testify for someone he'd never met. She thought about the fact that she'd stood up to an admiral and a hospital director, and a system designed to silence people like her, and somehow she was still here, still breathing, still able to help. Her phone buzzed with a message from Voss. "Mercer wants to meet. Says there's one more thing about the investigation you need to know." Lena showed Reed the message. "What now?" "Probably just cleanup, final witness statements, documentation verification." But something in Reed's expression didn't match his casual tone. "You know what this is about?" "I have suspicions." "Tell me." Reed was quiet for a long moment. "There's evidence that Reeves didn't act alone, that someone higher up approved Sandstorm despite the intelligence warnings, someone who's still in a position of authority." Lena's blood went cold. "Who?" "That's what Mercer wants to discuss. But it means the investigation isn't over. It just got bigger." The coffee had gone cold by the time Reed finished explaining what Mercer had uncovered. Lena sat motionless, processing information that rewrote everything she thought she understood about Kandahar. Vice Admiral Catherine Brennan. Reed's voice was flat, clinical. She was Deputy Commander of Naval Operations at the time. Reeves reported directly to her, and according to documents Barlow provided, she personally approved Operation Sandstorm after reviewing the same intelligence warnings that showed the area was compromised. Why would she do that? Because she was building a case for expanded special operations funding. She needed proof that small reconnaissance units could operate in hostile territory and gather actionable intelligence. Your unit was the test case. Reed pulled up a file on his phone. After Kandahar, she used the operation as evidence in budget hearings, cited it as an example of high-risk missions yielding strategic value, got funding approved for 3 more programs. Lena's hands clenched around her cup hard enough to hurt. She used us as a sales pitch. She used 4 dead sailors and 4 wounded ones to get money, then helped Reeves cover it up when people started asking questions. Reed's jaw was tight. Brennan's currently stationed at the Pentagon, 3rd in line for Chief of Naval Operations. If Mercer can prove she knew about the intelligence warnings and approved the mission anyway, she goes down harder than Reeves. How do we prove it? Mercer has Brennan's signature on the operation approval, but she's claiming she was given sanitized intelligence reports that didn't include the warnings. Says Reeves withheld critical information. That's a lie. Probably. But Brennan's got 30 years of credibility and connections all the way to the Secretary of Defense. Proving she's lying requires finding someone who was in the room when she received the full briefing. Reed looked at Lena. Mercer thinks that person exists. She wants your help finding them. I was a corpsman. I didn't have access to that level. No. But you knew people who did. Commanding officers, intelligence analysts, anyone from your unit who might remember seeing Brennan's name on classified documents. Reed leaned forward. Mercer's hitting a wall. Brennan's people are stonewalling, claiming executive privilege and national security. We need someone who can crack that open from the inside. Lena thought about the names she'd tried to forget. The faces of people she'd served with who'd moved on to other assignments, other lives, while she'd been stuck in Kandahar. Most of them probably wanted nothing to do with revisiting that mission, but maybe one of them knew something. There was an intelligence officer, Lieutenant Marcus Shaw. He briefed us before the mission. If anyone saw the full intelligence package, it would have been him. Reed typed the name into his phone. Where is he now? No idea. Haven't talked to him in 3 years. I'll have Mercer track him down. Reed stood. In the meantime, she wants to see you. Now. They drove back to Norfolk Naval Station, where Mercer was waiting in her office with files spread across every surface. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, running on coffee and determination. Corpsman Graves, sit. Mercer didn't waste time on pleasantries. I need you to look at something. She pulled up surveillance footage on her computer. Grainy video of a conference room somewhere in the Pentagon, people in uniform sitting around a table. The timestamp was dated 6 days before Operation Sandstorm. This is from a classified briefing about special operations funding. Watch the woman at the head of the table. Lena watched as Vice Admiral Brennan stood and pointed to a map projected on the wall. Even without audio, her body language was clear. Confident, authoritative, selling something to the room. Mercer froze the video. That map shows the exact coordinates where your unit was sent. And those papers she's holding? Those are the intelligence reports showing hostile activity in the area. She had the full briefing. She knew. Can you prove those are the reports? That's the problem. The documents aren't clear enough in the footage to be definitive evidence. We need someone who was in that room to testify about what was discussed. Mercer pulled up another file. We've identified 6 people who attended that briefing. 4 are refusing to cooperate. 1 is overseas on deployment, and the last one is Lieutenant Commander Marcus Shaw, who resigned his commission 2 years ago and hasn't responded to any attempts at contact. Where is he? Seattle, working as a civilian consultant for a defense contractor. And according to his former colleagues, he's been drinking heavily since leaving the service. Mercer met Lena's eyes. I need you to talk to him. You served together. He might open up to you in a way he won't to investigators. We weren't friends. I was enlisted. He was an officer. Different worlds. But you were both in Kandahar. That's a connection most people don't have. Mercer closed her laptop. Shaw is the key to proving Brennan knew. Without him, she walks. And if she walks, every operation she's approved since then comes under question. Every casualty, every mission. We need closure on this, Corpsman. Lena looked at Reed, who nodded slightly. I'll go with you. Make it official Navy business instead of just a former colleague showing up. When? Tomorrow morning. There's a transport leaving at 0600. Mercer stood. Bring him back willing to testify, and we end this. All of it. The flight to Seattle took 5 hours. Lena spent most of it staring out the window at clouds that looked like the smoke she remembered from Kandahar. Reed sat across from her reading files, occasionally making notes, giving her space to process what they were about to do. You nervous? Reed asked as they descended toward the airport. I don't know what I am. That's fair. They rented a car and drove to an address Mercer had provided in a part of Seattle that looked like it had seen better decades. Shaw's apartment was in a converted warehouse with cracked concrete and windows that didn't quite close all the way. Reed knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Shaw, it's Commander Reed from Naval Medical Command. I need to talk to you about Operation Sandstorm. Footsteps inside, then a voice rough from disuse. Go away. I've got Hospital Corpsman Graves with me. She was there. Silence. Then locks clicking open and the door swinging back to reveal Marcus Shaw looking nothing like the officer Lena remembered. He was maybe 35 now, but looked 50. Unshaven, eyes red-rimmed, clothes that hadn't been washed recently. Graves. Shaw's voice cracked on her name. I heard you were making noise about Kandahar. Can we come in? Shaw stepped back and they entered an apartment that smelled like stale beer and regret. Empty bottles covered the kitchen counter. Files and papers scattered across a desk in the corner like he'd been reviewing something over and over. I know why you're here, Shaw said. Mercer's been calling for weeks, leaving messages, telling me I'm the key to bringing down Brennan. Are you? Shaw laughed bitterly. I was the intelligence officer who briefed Brennan before Sandstorm. I showed her everything. Drone footage, intercepts, tactical assessments. I told her the area was hot and your unit would be walking into a trap. She looked me in the eye and said, That's the point, Lieutenant. The words hung in the air like smoke. Lena felt something cold settle in her chest. She sent us in knowing we'd get hit. She needed confirmation. Needed bodies on the ground to trigger an enemy response so she could justify her budget requests. Needed casualties to prove the mission was dangerous enough to warrant more funding. Shaw sank into a chair. I tried to stop it, filed 3 separate objections, got overruled every time. Then after you came back after 4 men died, I was told to sanitize my reports and forget what I'd told Brennan. Why didn't you come forward? Because I'm a coward. Shaw's voice was raw. I resigned my commission, took a civilian job, and spent 2 years trying to drink away the fact that I helped kill 4 people by following orders. Reed stepped forward. You can still make this right. Testify about what Brennan knew. Help us prove she's responsible. You think testimony from a drunk former officer is going to bring down a vice admiral, combined with everything else we have? Yes. Reed pulled out his tablet and showed Shaw the evidence file. We've got Reeves, we've got Barlow, we've got Monroe, we've got documents and testimony and a pattern of conduct. All we're missing is proof that Brennan was at the top of the chain. You're that proof. Shaw stared at the tablet, his hands shaking. If I do this, my career is over. Defense contractors won't touch me. Nobody wants to hire the guy who turned on the Navy. Your career is already over, Lena said quietly. You're living in a dump, drinking yourself to death, carrying guilt that's going to kill you before the alcohol does. This is your chance to do something that matters with what's left. Shaw looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. 4 men died because I couldn't stop it. 17 more died after that because nobody stopped Brennan and Reeves from doing it again. Lena moved closer. I carried those 4 deaths for 3 years thinking I wasn't good enough to save them. Thinking I failed as a medic, and now I know the truth. They died because people like Brennan thought their lives were worth less than budget line items. You want to make it right? Help me make sure she answers for it. Shaw's jaw worked like he was chewing words he didn't want to swallow. Then he stood, walked to his desk, and pulled out a folder stuffed with documents. I kept copies, everything from the briefing, the objections I filed, the sanitization orders. I've been sitting on this for 2 years waiting for someone to ask the right questions. He handed the folder to Reed. Take it. I'll testify. But I want immunity. I broke classification rules keeping these files. I'll make the call, Reed said. 2 days later, Lena stood in Mercer's office watching footage of Vice Admiral Catherine Brennan being escorted from her Pentagon office by federal agents. The woman who'd sent 8 people into a trap to prove a budget point walked past cameras and handcuffs, her face carefully blank, her career evaporating with each flash of a photographer's camera. Vice Admiral arrested in military scandal, Pentagon official charged with negligent homicide. Second high-ranking officer faces court-martial. Mercer turned off the television. Shaw's testimony was decisive. Combined with the documents he provided, we've got enough to charge Brennan with dereliction of duty, obstruction, and 17 counts of negligent homicide. She's facing decades in military prison. What about Reeves? Trial starts next week. His lawyers tried to cut a deal, but the prosecution refused. They want the maximum sentence. Mercer pulled up another file. There's one more thing. The families of the men who died in Kandahar have filed a civil lawsuit against both Brennan and Reeves. Wrongful death. They're asking for $50 million in damages. Will they win? With everything we've uncovered? Almost certainly. And more importantly, it'll be public. Every detail of how their loved ones died will be in court records for anyone to see. No more cover-ups. Lena thought about Williams's widow, about Garcia's mother, about families who'd spent years believing their people died as heroes when the truth was so much uglier. They deserve to know what happened. They're going to, and they're going to watch the people responsible pay for it. Mercer closed her laptop. You did this, Corman. You brought down 2 flag officers, exposed systemic corruption, and changed how the Navy handles casualties. That's not nothing. It won't bring anyone back. No, but it might save the next unit that gets sent on a mission, like Sandstorm. And sometimes prevention is the best justice we can get. 3 months later, Lena stood outside a lecture hall at the Naval Medical Training Center in San Diego, watching a new class of hospital corpsmen file in for their first day of advanced trauma training. They looked young and eager and terrified in equal measure, the way she'd looked 8 years ago. Commander Reed appeared beside her carrying coffee. Ready? I don't know what I'm doing. You're teaching them what you learned the hard way. That's the whole point. Reed handed her the coffee. And for what it's worth, the students specifically requested you, said they wanted to learn from someone who'd actually been there. Lena walked into the lecture hall, and 23 faces turned toward her. Some looked curious, some skeptical, all of them judging whether she was worth listening to. I'm Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Lena Graves, she said. 3 years ago, I was attached to a SEAL unit that got ambushed in Afghanistan. 8 people went in, 4 came out. I'm going to teach you how to make sure your numbers are better than mine. For the next 6 hours, she walked them through trauma protocols with a level of detail most instructors never reached. She didn't sugarcoat the realities, showed them what sucking chest wounds actually looked like, how fast someone could bleed out from a severed femoral artery, the sound a dying person makes when their lung collapses. During the break, a young corpsman approached her nervously. Ma'am, I heard about what you did. Taking down those admirals. That was brave. It was necessary. There's a difference. Still, you could have taken the money and disappeared. Nobody would have blamed you. Lena thought about the settlement she'd turned down, the quiet life she could have had, the anonymity she'd spent 3 years perfecting. Sometimes the things nobody blames you for are the things you'd blame yourself for. I'd already spent 3 years carrying guilt that wasn't mine. I wasn't about to add more. The corpsman nodded and headed back to his seat. Reed appeared in the doorway and gestured for Lena to step outside. Reeves' verdict just came in. Guilty on all counts. 40 years at Leavenworth, dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all pay and benefits. Lena leaned against the wall. And Brennan? Her trial starts next month, but the prosecution is confident. Shaw's testimony plus the documents sealed it. She's looking at similar numbers. Reed paused. Holloway got 3 years for assault. Starts serving next week. That's it? 3 years? It's a first offense and he's got no prior record. But he'll never work in hospital administration again. His medical license is under review and his reputation is destroyed. Sometimes losing everything you built is punishment enough. Lena thought about Holloway's hand across her face, the moment everything had started. How that single act of contempt had unraveled so many lies and brought down so many people who'd thought they were untouchable. The hospital board wants you to speak at a ceremony next week, Reed continued. They're implementing new veteran care protocols and naming them after you. The Graves Initiative. I don't want my name on anything. Too late. You're a public figure now, whether you like it or not. The former nurse who brought down corrupt admirals and changed military policy. That's your legacy. My legacy is 4 dead men I couldn't save. Your legacy is 4 live men who are only alive because you refuse to quit, and 17 people who won't die in future operations because you forced the Navy to change. Reed's voice was firm. Stop diminishing what you did, Lena. You fought the most powerful institution in the country and won. That matters. The lecture hall door opened and students started filing out for the day. Several of them nodded to Lena as they passed, and she saw something in their faces she'd never seen in her own reflection. Respect earned not from rank or authority, but from surviving something difficult and using that survival to help others. That evening, Lena stood on the beach near the training center, watching the sun drop toward the Pacific. The water was calm, the sky clear, the kind of evening that felt stolen from somewhere prettier. She thought about Kandahar and Greymont and all the places in between where she'd tried to hide from who she was. Her phone buzzed. A message from Monroe. Heard you're teaching now. Good. Those kids need someone who knows what's actually waiting for them. And you need a mission that isn't just running. She typed back, "Thank you for seeing me." His response came immediately. "Thank you for remembering us." Another message, this one from William's widow. "We attended Reeves's sentencing today. All the families. We wanted him to see what his decisions cost. I thought you should know we were there." Lena stared at that message for a long time, imagining the families of 4 men she'd tried to save sitting in a courtroom watching justice happen, wondering if it brought them any peace or just highlighted everything they'd lost. She walked back toward her car where Reed was waiting to drive her to temporary housing the Navy had arranged. Not a safe house this time, just an apartment near the training center. A place to live instead of hide. "You think any of this actually changes anything?" Lena asked as they drove through base housing. "I think 2 admirals are going to prison, and the Navy revised its entire operational approval process. I think 17 families finally know the truth about how their people died. I think a bunch of young medics are learning from someone who survived the worst day of her life." Reed glanced at her. "Change doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it just looks like making sure the next person has a better chance." "That's optimistic. That's reality. You didn't fix everything, but you fixed some things. And you did it alone, against people with 30 years of power and connections and institutional protection. That's not nothing." They pulled up to Lena's building and she sat in the passenger seat for a moment, not quite ready to go inside to another temporary space. "What happens now?" she asked. "You teach. You testify at Brennan's trial. You figure out what kind of life you want now that you're not running from the old one." Reed smiled slightly. "Maybe you even let yourself believe you're worth something." "I'm working on it." "I noticed." Lena climbed out and watched Reed drive away into the California dusk. Then she went inside to an apartment that wasn't home yet, but might become one. She unpacked the challenge coin Monroe had given her and set it on the kitchen counter where she'd see it every morning. The next day, she taught another class, and the day after that. The students asked hard questions, and she gave them honest answers about what trauma medicine actually required. Not heroics or bravery, just competence and refusal to quit when everything was terrible. 2 weeks later, she stood in a courtroom in Virginia, watching Vice Admiral Brennan sit stone-faced while prosecutors detailed every decision she'd made, every life she'd sacrificed, every cover-up she'd engineered to protect her career. Shaw testified for 6 hours, his voice steady despite the career suicide he was committing. Barlow testified. Monroe testified via video from his hospital bed. And then it was Lena's turn. She walked to the witness stand in her dress uniform, the first time she'd worn it since her discharge, and placed her hand on the Bible. The oath felt heavier than it should have. "State your name for the record." Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Lena Graves, United States Navy, retired. The prosecutor walked her through Kandahar in excruciating detail, every decision, every casualty, every moment when she'd thought she was failing but had actually been fighting against impossible odds created by people who should have protected her unit. Brennan's lawyer cross-examined her with questions designed to make her look unreliable. Didn't she have PTSD? Hadn't she been discharged for psychological reasons? Wasn't it possible she was misremembering events from a traumatic experience? I remember everything, Lena said quietly. Every face, every wound, every person I tried to save. I've spent 3 years wishing I could forget, but I can't, and neither should you. The lawyer had no response to that. The trial lasted 2 more weeks. When the verdict came in, guilty on 14 counts, 45 years at Leavenworth. Lena was standing in the hallway outside the courtroom with the families of the men who'd died. They watched Brennan walk past in handcuffs, and nobody said anything. There wasn't anything to say that would make the losses hurt less. But William's widow squeezed Lena's hand once before leaving, and that felt like something. 6 months after she'd been fired from Riverside Memorial Hospital, Lena stood in a conference room at Naval Medical Command watching a PowerPoint presentation about combat casualty care improvements. The speaker was citing Operation Sandstorm as a case study in what not to do, how command failures could undermine even the best medical personnel. Hospital Corpsman Graves managed to save 50% of her unit despite catastrophic circumstances, the speaker said. Her actions that day exemplify the training we're trying to instill in all combat medics. But more importantly, her advocacy afterward changed how we assess mission risks and protect medical personnel from command negligence. Lena listened to someone else describe her worst day as a teaching moment and felt the strangest sensation. Not pride exactly, but something close to acceptance. What had happened in Kandahar would always be terrible. 4 men would always be dead. But maybe their deaths could mean something beyond just tragedy if they prevented future casualties. After the presentation, a young lieutenant approached her. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. I'm deploying next month with a SEAL team and I've been reading everything about sandstorm protocols. The training you developed has already saved lives in theater." "How many?" "Last count, at least 8 confirmed. Units that would have walked into ambushes got pulled back because of the new intelligence verification requirements you helped create. 8 lives, 8 people who'd go home to families instead of coming back in boxes. 8 second chances that Williams and Garcia and Kowalski and Tran never got." "That's good," Lena said. "That matters." That evening, she drove back to San Diego and stopped at the beach again. The same beach where she'd stood 6 months ago trying to figure out who she was now that she'd stopped running. The water looked the same. The sky looked the same. But something fundamental had shifted in the way she saw herself. Her phone rang. Reed's number. "I got a call from the VA," he said. "They want you to consult on a new veteran support initiative, specifically helping former combat medics transition to civilian health care." "I'm teaching." This would be in addition to teaching. Speaking engagements, program development, advocacy work. They're calling it the Veterans Medical Transition Program. That sounds like becoming a public figure. That sounds like using your experience to help people who are going through what you went through. People who think they failed, who carry guilt that isn't theirs, who need someone to tell them it's possible to survive trauma and still have a life worth living. Lena looked out at the ocean, at water that stretched to horizons she couldn't see. "I don't know if I'm qualified to tell people how to survive. You're standing here talking to me instead of hiding in some city where nobody knows your name. You brought down 2 admirals who thought they were untouchable. You created training protocols that are saving lives. If that's not qualified, I don't know what is. Let me think about it." "Think fast. They want to announce the program next month." Lena hung up and sat in her car watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that looked impossible. She thought about all the versions of herself she'd been. The eager young corpsman deploying for the first time, the traumatized survivor who couldn't forgive herself, the anonymous nurse hiding in emergency rooms, the reluctant witness who'd stood up to power, and now this version, the instructor, the advocate, the person who'd survived and decided survival meant something beyond just not dying. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Reed. "Tell the VA I'm interested." Then she drove home to her apartment that was starting to feel less temporary. Monroe's challenge coin sat on her counter next to keys and mail and the ordinary debris of a life being lived. She picked it up and felt the weight of legacy and honor and the simple truth that she'd earned her place among people who understood what it meant to serve. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen table, a half-finished lesson plan for next week's class displayed on screen. She sat down and kept writing, translating her worst experiences into knowledge that might keep someone else's worst day from happening. Somewhere across the country, Reeves and Brennan were beginning their prison sentences. Holloway was starting his. The families of the men who had died finally had answers and justice and the cold comfort of knowing someone had fought for the truth. And in San Diego, in a small apartment near the training center, hospital corpsman second-class Lena Graves, retired, decorated, survivor, was building a life that mattered not because she was perfect, but because she'd refused to let imperfect be the same as worthless. She'd been fired for helping someone, had been struck for doing the right thing, had been threatened and hidden and nearly broken by people who thought power made them invincible. And she'd won anyway. Not because she was special, not because she was a hero, but because she'd remembered what mattered when everyone else had forgotten, that people weren't disposable, that truth was worth fighting for, that standing up to power was terrifying but possible. The lesson plan finished itself around midnight. Lena saved it, closed her laptop, and looked around at the small apartment that was becoming home. Tomorrow she'd teach 23 students how to keep people alive under impossible circumstances. Next month she'd help design programs to support veterans like her. Next year she'd probably testify at more trials, give more interviews, become even more visible. And somewhere in all of that, she'd finally figure out how to forgive herself for the people she couldn't save by honoring them enough to save everyone she could. The challenge coin caught light from the kitchen lamp, and Lena picked it up one more time. Monroe's words echoed in her mind. Fair winds and following seas. The sailor's blessing. The hope that the journey ahead would be easier than the journey behind. Lena wasn't sure she believed in easy, but she believed in possible. And right now, that was enough. She turned off the lights and went to bed, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't dream about Kandahar. She dreamed about the students she'd teach tomorrow, the lives they'd save, the future she was helping build one lesson at a time. The quiet nurse they'd dismissed had been a warrior all along. And now she was teaching a new generation to fight the battles that actually mattered, the ones where victory was measured not in rank or medals, but in people who went home alive. That was justice. Imperfect, incomplete, but real. And sometimes real was the best you could hope for.